Okay, welcome everybody to the CCWD regular board meeting of Wednesday, August 22nd. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Rebecca, can you take roll, please?
Director Strange?
Present.
Director Davidson?
Here.
Director Thomas?
I'm here.
Director Underhill? President Rada?
Yes, here. Item 2 on our agenda is public comment. At this time, members of the public may address the board on any non-agendized item. The public is encouraged to work through staff to place items on the agenda for board consideration. No action can be taken on these matters not listed on the agenda. Comments are limited to 3 minutes per person. Do we have any public comment? Okay, so seeing none, we're going to go to the consent agenda. The following items are expected to be routine, non-controversial. Items will be acted upon by the board at one time without discussion. Any board member may request that any item be removed for later discussion. We have 3A is approval of minutes of the board meeting. That's the only item on the consent agenda.
Move for approval.
Second.
Okay, we got a motion and a second. Any discussion? Nope. Rebecca, can you take roll?
Director Strange?
Yes.
Director Davidson?
Yes.
Director Thomas?
Yes.
Director Underhill?
Yes.
President Rada?
Yes. Okay, item 4 on our agenda is new business, discussion direction regarding comparator agencies and compensation study by Koff and Associates. Stacy Lawler, Director of HR and Customer Service.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Stacy.
The light is on?
Okay.
Earlier this year in May, the district contracted with Coffin Associates to conduct a salary survey, a total comp salary survey for us. Total compensation being both salary and benefits for the district. This was part of our duties under the SEIU Local 1021 contract. Today we have Georg from Coffin Associates here, and he's going to give a presentation to the board on the process of the salary survey, which we have already started, and today is our first milestone here with the board. We've been working with both of the bargaining units of SEIU and the Management Confidential Group, and we have agreed to a set of comparator and benchmarks, which Georg is also going to talk to you about, and then the process thereafter.
Thank you, Stacy. Good afternoon, honorable board members. It's a pleasure to be here. Again, my name is Georg Kramer. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Coffin Associates, and I'm just here to talk to you where we are with the compensation study. We're really just getting started, but the presentation of comparator agencies is one of the major components. The presentation, the agreement on the comparator agencies is one of the major components of the compensation study. Anytime you do a total compensation study, like Stacy said, there are 3 major study elements that we come to agreement on before we do any data collection or analysis. Number 1, of course, most importantly, the comparator agencies. Number 2, the benchmark classifications, and number 3, benefits. I'll start at the bottom first. In terms of the benefits, so in addition to base salaries, we will look at a whole array of benefits, including the value and the cost of benefits like retirement, insurance coverage for medical, dental, vision, and other types of insurance. We're going to look at leave policies, including holidays, vacation, any administrative or personal leave, deferred compensation programs that an agency might be contributing to on behalf of employees. And then there's going to be a few additional items that we're going to most likely look at, depending on what our conversations result in with Management Confidential and SEIU, again, to come to an agreement of what the components of the survey will be. In terms of the benchmark classifications, benchmarking is a pretty standard approach to doing compensation surveys. And what it means is that when we look at an agency's list of job classifications, and we look at each of the classification series and its levels, the job families that exist in the organization. We typically select a certain number of representatives or benchmarks from that whole list that we go out and survey. It's typically usually about 60 to 65% of the classifications of an agency that we survey. We obtain market data on those, and then when it comes to making recommendations, we then will look at the market data for the benchmark classifications that we obtained, and then the rest of the classifications on the list within each job family and within each classification series will be internally aligned with those benchmark classifications that we surveyed. And again, that's a pretty typical approach to doing a compensation survey. I didn't put the list of benchmarks on the slide because it's a little bit too long, but I understand it's in the staff report that was submitted to the board if you'd like to take a look and if you have any questions about those. And then thirdly, probably the most important aspect of a compensation study is to identify a reasonable labor market, a market that will represent the agency based on a variety of factors that we look at, and you have them on the slide here, where we look at things like organizational structure and just the type of the organization. One of the important things, of course, that we look at are the services that the organization provides. And we want to identify agencies that provide similar services, but also are similar in other aspects of the district when it comes to the number of employees, when it comes to budgets, population served. We also look at some ratios of, as it says, as you can see here at the bottom of the slide, expenditures per capita as well as employees to population. And then finally, we look at some cost of living factors as well, because cost of living does help us define what the labor market looks like for the district. So all of these factors are looked at, and for each factor, Calaveras County Water District is compared to a list of other agencies. Usually we start with a longer list that could be 18, 20 or more agencies that we look at initially. We then analyze them all based on these factors. For each factor, all the agencies are ranked against each other. And then when you look at all of the factors combined, we basically come up with a score that sort of moves those agencies that are closest to the district towards the top. That's the initial step of the process. That is more of a quantitative analysis that we do. And then what's just as, if not more important, is we brought that analysis back, and then we met with management, confidential, SEIU, HR representatives to discuss that list and refine it based on the group's knowledge of the industry, also based on considerations such as turnover, who might the district be losing employees to is an important consideration, because that represents your real competition over talent. And so based on all of those conversations, we had a couple of those as a whole team, as you might imagine. It was quite a bit of a dialogue. And out of those, we arrived at the following 11 agencies that we will survey. As you can see, there's a mix of some special districts. The majority actually of the agencies are special districts, but we also included some agencies that are not special districts, such as cities that also provide similar services that you do. You'll find that not every agency, of course, is going to look like you. That's very unlikely. No two agencies are ever 100% the same. In fact, when we do our job matching, no two positions are ever 100% the same. But by surveying 10 to 12 agencies is what we usually recommend. So having 11 comparator agencies, that should give us a sufficient amount of data. And in fact, I don't know if I didn't include a slide, but in terms of the process itself, once we have an agreement on the agencies, we then just go out and do the surveying, the matching process of where we match the district's jobs to the jobs of all of those 11 agencies by looking at job descriptions and doing a position by position, job description by job description comparison. In fact, one of the exercises that is still in front of us is that our team is coming, the COF team is coming back on site to sit down with employees to give them an opportunity to communicate to us how their jobs might be unique in the industry, what they may want to emphasize in their job descriptions, just making sure that we are aware of any sort of unique factors of the organization. I've actually worked with the district a long time ago and have learned that you are quite unique. And my memory is being refreshed here and going through this process again. So that's important too, to understand how the organization is unique. I will certainly say that every organization is unique and different in its own ways. And so this matching process will not usually get you to a 100% absolute perfect result, but our goal is to understand your organization and then go about the matching process to get to at least a 70% matching result when we compare two jobs. Yes, please.
I can understand how you're going to get pretty accurate information from this district and what everyone's doing. When you go to each of those 11 districts, why would they spend a whole lot of time with you on this? What prompts them to take the time out of their busy day and schedule to give you that kind of detailed information that you're going to need for a comparison of, let's just say, what everyone does on a daily or weekly or monthly basis for their jobs?
Yeah, that's a great question, and there's certainly a respect that we have for everybody's time. Those agencies that are part of this survey, they have other priorities, they have lots of other things on their to-do list, right? So what we try to do is come to them as informed as possible before we contact them. And so we usually start with the agency's website. Coming out of the recession, there's been a lot more transparency when it comes to job descriptions, salary schedules, benefits information. So, budget documents, allocation lists, organizational charts. There's a lot of information that we can usually obtain from a website. And that's our first step. From there, we do as much analysis as possible. And then we typically work with HR professionals at each agency to fill any holes that we have in our analysis. Whether it's certain jobs we weren't able to match, where we need to have a little bit more of a conversation with someone, or we just need whatever the data is that we might need that's not posted on the website. I will certainly say because this is such a typical aspect of what organizations do, and any of these 11 agencies may be in the same boat as you are, any given time. Normally, I'd say about 98% of the time, they're quite forthcoming with information. And, we try to be as prepared as possible before we talk to them, so they don't feel like, well, why haven't you looked at our website? All this information is already posted. So then we're just in a place where we confirm information, make sure that all the information on everybody's website is actually up to date and current, and then ask whatever list of questions we may have that we weren't able to answer ourselves.
Yeah, I would see the other side of it, that I would see an agency wanting to provide you with information, because yours worked with, Jeff, he worked with us back in 2004. He did.
I'll have to trust you on that.
Okay, he told me he did.
Probably one of my first projects was when I joined COF, so yeah.
I'm
So
not sure what I had for dinner last night.
So they have been around for a long time, and so, other agencies would want to get on your radar,
Yeah, it's a good point. We do have a lot of connections in the industry. The Coffin Associates has been around for 34 years, and we've built the business originally just from assisting water and wastewater agencies in the San Francisco Bay Area. And so now that while we work with cities and counties and all kinds of public agencies, the water and wastewater industry is still at the core of our market and of our niche that we serve. So we have a lot of contacts, and then one of the things that we usually also suggest, and I haven't actually quite asked that of your management yet, but I hope we'll get the permission that we usually share the survey results with the participating agencies as a thank you to say, we appreciate you taking the time to work with us.
I have a question. Now, once the study is done, obviously there's a big disparity in cost of living in some of these counties, and if you can't compare Roseville or
South Lake Tahoe with, Amador or Calaveras County. So is there an adjustment made for the cost of living? Is that taken into account?
Yes, it is, and that's a great question as well. So aside from the fact that cost of living was one of the factors that we looked at in the analysis of coming up with those 11 agencies, when it comes to the data itself, what we look at is cost of labor, actually. It's a little bit of a different factor, but similar to cost of living. Cost of labor, which is really cost of wages, is something that we can look at, and if there is too great a discrepancy between our client agency and any of the comparator agencies, then we might use a geographic adjustment factor that neutralizes that comparator agency's data.
So what information is the geographical, what is that?
It's a cost of labor factor that we look at, and we get that
Not
information.
housing, just wages.
It's just for wages, yeah. For housing, median household income, cost of living are factors that we look at when we determine the list of agencies. When it comes to adjusting wages in any fashion, we look at cost of wages. And the reason we do that is because cost of wages is what an employer has influence over, and therefore, has some control, whereas cost of living, of course, includes everything from bread, butter, and milk to gas prices
I'm
to
not talking
housing.
about, I'm talking about housing, primarily housing. But, so if you use that information to compile this list, then that cost of living will at least be part of the report, how you determine these? Because
Yes.
there's a pretty wide swing in cost of living in some of these agencies.
Right. Yeah. It'll be fully transparent, and it'll be part of our report that we're going to submit to the board, and it was considered in selecting these agencies.
Okay, thank you.
Excuse me, did I miss something, or how did we get the rankings from 1 to 11? Was that comparable agencies to us?
Comparable agency. Yes. This is actually
Amador is closest to us?
This is actually just an alphabetic listing.
Oh, okay.
So it's not the actual score.
Oh, okay.
That detail could certainly be provided to the board if
Oh,
you'd like
no,
to see it.
that
But
sounded
this
cool.
is just alphabetical.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Mhm.
And we spent a lot of time on this, as Georg was saying, and it involved representatives from each of the unions, and this is a really important step today with the board, is to make sure that the list of comparators is something that everybody's comfortable with, because we don't want to have any questions at the end or concerns that this is not a representative group to or an adequate group or appropriate group for us to use. Kind of what we were looking at is certainly, obviously we're not looking at Bay Area, we're not looking at Southern California, but we were looking within locally and regionally, and obviously a big part of this is to determine how we compare against that market that we compete against for the same group of employees. And then as well, we've got to look at the internal competitiveness, the equity issues internally as well, how different positions, classifications, and their compensation relates to each other within that. So within this, I think where we really came down was we were looking for representation within the San Joaquin Valley and within the Sacramento regional area, knowing that those are definitely two areas that would be competing for our labor, and conceivably people could commute to work. So, it's not a science, but this is based on I do appreciate though the things that you guys looked at. You had a number of factors as he was explaining to evaluate whether they were similar or not, and if something was completely an outlier, then that would be removed from the list. Lastly, just a point that, we're kind of because of the fact that we have water and wastewater operations, it makes it even more of a challenge to come up with this list, because you have some of the agencies, El Dorado Irrigation District for sure, some of the cities that operate water and wastewater utilities, but you have other systems that are only water or sewer, and what we're trying to do is to find comparables that have similarly complex systems to ours, and the size labor force that we do and those kind of things. So that's why you have some of these, like SAC's Regional Sanitation District, because in the Sacramento area everything is regionalized. You don't have multiple wastewater agencies, so that would be the agency that would have a level of system sophistication that it would have enough positions that we could compare against, and would be why we added this to the list. So, in any event,
I don't think I'm adding to the clarity here, except to say this was a lot of thought went into this, and if you have any questions about any of the agencies on this list, please let us know. That's really what this is all about, is to make sure you have comfort, and no action is certainly required, but that you can say that we can receive direction to move forward. This is going to then give them what they need to launch into their analysis to come back with the data based on the benchmark classifications and the comparable agencies.
So is this the best time to ask questions then for you? Are you done with your presentation?
Yes, I'm done. Thank you.
Okay, I do have a number of questions, and it really focuses on what we have here. I went and researched. The only thing available most current is 2014, 2015, at least what I found on the website, comparing counties on a per capita income and a per family income, and there's one other thing too. I've not been part of this discussion. I understand it's a negotiation with the union on these, but I do have some issues or questions regarding some of those entities on the list. For instance, both El Dorado and Placer County are within the top 10 or 11 counties in the entire state in per capita income and per family income. If I don't know about the other board directors, but if you've ever been up the highway, or recently been up the Highway 50 or the Highway 80 corridor, visiting Placer or El Dorado County, they're very different in a number of different characteristics, including commercial, and we could go on and on and on. There are, I'm sure, some characteristics that are similar, but I feel because of the strength, and South Tahoe is part of El Dorado County, I don't feel personally, with the limited knowledge that I have, that those are fair comparisons to put up there for recommended agencies. Sierra County, Plumas County are areas that they're outside of the region, but to me, they might provide more characteristics of a Calaveras County. I don't know. I mean, I'm just throwing that out. Very good matches, both within the per capita income and per family income, are Tuolumne, Amador, and to a certain degree, even Sacramento. Again, city of Tracy, the growth that's going on in there, the city of Roseville, the same thing. Even Lodi, as they're expanding west. With my limited background, I mean, for me, it's really a per capita income, as well as employees that you could pull from. You know, personally, I don't think some of those are good comparisons. And educate me, but I do agree that you will never find a 100% match in other agencies, nor should we expect it.
Well, that's kind of my point, but I was talking about something different. I mean,
right.
The cost of living, I think, is more important or at least equally as important as the income. Most of the income from Calaveras County comes from Rancho Calaveras, 70% of which the people work outside the county.
Or are retired and have a significant pension in retirement income.
Correct, and that's true of some of these, like the city of Tracy. They're, it's still a big commute town. There's a lot of industry that has moved there, but so I just keep going back to, we can compare them, but there has to be some offset. We have to, when we look at that wage number, we want to be able to look at, okay, a house costs $200,000 more, and so there is a differential in the cost of living. I mean, you simply have to pay people more so they can afford to live within your community. So I just want to make sure that when we do this, I mean, I agree with Sierra probably is a good one, and I agree that some of these are going to be in certainly wealthier areas with a lot more going on than we are, and most likely they're going to be only going to one regional plant, which is another thing. Most of these communities have one big regional plant. We've got God knows how many. So I mean, there's a lot of differences, but I just want there to be. I want to be able to look at it as a director and see another number that I can compare cost of living, or maybe several factors like what he brings up. But certainly, the price of the biggest ticket that most people do is they pay for their home. you know, and in most of these areas, they're paying a couple $100,000 more, you know, on average for the house. So I just want to be able to
Right.
have something that we can take a look at and say, okay, you know, say, just as an example, you know, say, you know, South Tahoe, you know, is gonna be a little higher in wages, maybe, maybe not. But then, you know, the average home price is 600,000, we're here, it's 350. You know, I'd like to be able to make that, to be able to have some sort of way to sort of buffer whether or not it's an equal, because it's not about
Sure.
pay, it's about quality of life.
I've got one more remark though,
Well, that's fine.
although you took over the platform there, guy, from me.
Well, that's fine.
Go ahead, finish up.
It's about quality of life. It's not about how much income people are making. We want our staff to have a good quality of life. You know, it isn't about the most money.
Right, I will certainly say what I've found over the years is that, as you said, when you compare cost of living and cost of housing, it doesn't always, it's not always an absolute sort of crossover from there to income, right? In some communities, cost of housing may be greater, but wages may not be that much greater, and people are, you know, make a quality of life choice to say, I'm going to have to pay more for my housing. A greater percentage of my income is going to go towards housing than maybe in another community. So I think it's important to look at cost of housing. It's important to look at median income and wages. And that was part of our analysis. It's also important to ensure that we find agencies that represent the district in terms of the actual services that are provided, the infrastructure that you are maintaining, and the operations that you have here as well. So it's a combination of you know, probably a good 8 to 10 factors or so that we look at, and then out of all of those, we narrow it down to 11 agencies in this case.
So the last time that one of these was done was what, 15 years ago? And so if it's going to take another 15 years to do another one, to me, I think it's very important to do it, you know, in a way that we can all agree on. Now, the last time that I worked for a governmental agency, my house was worth more than it is right now. And that was in the late 90s. And my income was about $50,000 to $52,000 a year. Probably in today's comparison, well, I won't even make a statement as to what I think that salary might be now, but that was a management position. You know, and I don't know, it just, the housing kind of is the same as it was in the 90s, at least where I live. There were a lot of things that were very similar to the 90s, still in many places in this county. So why do I make that statement? It's just, I'm concerned that we get you know, adequate comparisons. And I can understand the frustration of those of you that have been in these negotiations. Believe me, I don't take it lightly. But at the same time, again, if we're going to do this once every 15 years, I just, to me, it's very important for the planning.
David and Russ.
Yeah, just, and I sure hope we don't wait 15 years. That's not advisable. This needs to be done on I would say probably every 10 to 10 years, probably closer to 5, would certainly be ideal. And I know people have been waiting for this for a long time, but we didn't want to do this piecemeal, you know, a few positions here, a few positions there, doing it internally. We wanted to do it comprehensively, holistically with the experts. And I hope you can see that we've got an incredible team that's working on this. One of the things what really came to why we really looked for, you know, some of what you see in the Sacramento area, some of the agencies you've called out that you think may not be, because of cost of living, you know, housing, that kind of thing might not be a good fit. The reason we felt like it made sense to have some representation, the most similar type agencies we could find within that market, is because that is absolutely a competitor of ours for the staff, the staffing that we hire. I won't, obviously can't get into specifics, but I'll just tell you that in recruiting for one of our executive positions recently, that was squarely the case, and I ended up losing someone to that market. So knowing how we stand in relationship to them, I think is really important. Georg, what you're talking about adding, if we can have that additional information, the layers about, okay, here's what housing looks like, here's what wages look like, those different factors, so you can see it through that lens to determine, okay, do we really need to be, you know, on par exactly wage-wise with that market if the housing is that much more than what we have here? And you need that information. And I would say if we can include that within the report, and have that as a tool to analyze the results as you consider how we move forward with them. That's how, personally, that's why I would think that would be the most helpful way to do it. Lastly, I just want to say it's, it was a surprise to me when a number of years ago, but obviously the housing prices are dramatically different, but South Tahoe happens to be the only disadvantaged community in the county of El Dorado. So in some ways but I get that, yeah, the housing
It's
issue.
a whole different dynamic, why it has disadvantage, because of all the
Services
hospitality
district, yeah, or services industry.
The thing that you don't wonder why we selected it is because it is a water and wastewater agency. It has a very similar size staff and budget, and in a lot of other ways it is similar, and it is certainly within an area that we could be competing for the same people. So again, my ask of the board to at least consider that we utilize a list, either this list or something very similar with representation from the San Joaquin Valley and from Sacramento, and to use those other factors in the narrative to really be able to analyze what does that mean. But lastly, I just wanted, and this truly is the last thing, some of the other counties, and yeah, I can see a lot of reason why you'd say, okay, let's look up and down the mountain counties, right, in any other rural county that might be similar. The challenge for some of that is like Sierra County. I know they have, it is a micro agency. I mean, with only a few people on staff as their public water agency. It's very, and Plumas I think is very similar too. So again, trying to find agencies that have, that's frankly one of our challenges in county. I mean, trying to find another agency that has enough staff. I mean, when you have local agencies that have, 5 or 6 or 7 employees, that doesn't give you enough representative classifications for us to compare against. It's only a few positions, and we need to have that range so that when you go in and do the work, that we can line up a number of different positions.
I don't know, maybe a Mariposa County or something. I'm not sure, but one of the things for me too is I've never been afraid of staff turnover. People relocate for a variety of reasons, not just their job salary. I mean, it's a family thing, it's a quality of life thing. It's, a lot of stuff that I see is a real advantage to attract folks from highly populated areas that just want a change in life. And we've had staff here that have moved from, Southern California to come up and take positions because again, it's a quality of life thing. And so I don't mind turnover. I think in some ways it can be healthy. Obviously, there's a lot of challenges with that.
Russ.
Okay,
And then Bertha.
Georg, you mentioned early on that you looked at 18 different ones and sort of cooked them down to these 11. Was it possible that Sierra County was one of the 18, the original?
It's a really good question. I'm not sure. I'd have to look at my cheat sheet in the office. I don't know if
It
anybody
wasn't, because
was
they have
okay.
one incorporated city in the city of Downeyville, and again, their public water agency there has probably 2 or 3 people at most on staff. It's just, there's just no comparable agency in that county, even though it may be a similar type county.
Following up on Terry's mentioning of Mariposa, I mean, they're just the next county down. Did you look at them?
Not that I don't recall that we did.
Don't think we'd look at
Okay.
Mariposa. I have a feeling we'd probably be in a similar situation where there might be an agency, but if we have, I'd say if we have less than 10 or even 15 employees, that means out of all of the job classifications at the district here that we're trying to find matches for, the majority won't have matches, and so it takes a lot of time and effort to do these surveys, and you're sort of spending time on an agency that really is not going to yield a lot of data in the end and might be sort of inconclusive, if you will.
Okay, I come from a construction background, a union employer, and I was always aware of when I did a public works project, they had hundreds of listings of prevailing wages and benefits, the packages. So do you ever look at those? Not that I'm asking you that you have to or you should, but do you look at them?
I would say it comes up certainly when we do our work, although I will say for our approach to any study is to, because the data is out there, to do a very customized study in the fashion that I've described, obtaining data that is up to date, up to the current, whatever the date is, that's going to be our bench line in terms of obtaining data. Up to that date, we can give you data that's most current. Sometimes with other data or databases, or even when we look at the, we subscribe to the Economic Research Institute that has a whole wealth of compensation data, cost of living and cost of labor type of data. You know, those types of databases, as renowned as they may be, they tend to lag behind a little bit. I think we heard it from Director Strange that sometimes the data you find out there is a little bit stale. And so our approach ensures that you're looking at the most current data, and we can do job matching that includes job description to job description at each agency.
Well, it would come as a big surprise to me that the Northern District Council of Laborers would have any of their data stale. I mean, if we were bidding a big public works project, it would be right up to the minute, right to the last negotiated contract.
Yeah.
You know, they'd have it modified within the hour.
Director Thomas, that is the prevailing wage rates. Certainly, they're applicable to our business when we're hiring on outside contractors to do work. But the challenge would be that's private industry, obviously labor rates for construction trades, and you know most of our positions are going to be positions that reside within public utilities, and so. That's kind of, and because the compensation, again, is the total compensation benefits the entire package, not just the wage. I don't know that would be, maybe in the case of a position or two, but otherwise I don't know that would really be useful information.
It would be useful information in all of the construction-related positions that we have. So, and I'm not saying that it's applicable. It's just as if you had somebody that felt like that they were being underpaid here, you could look at it and say, well, you could go to work for this union contractor and you'd be making less.
No, that makes sense, certainly.
Yeah, I was frustrated in, 2014, 2015 data on these counties. Why is it so old? Why isn't it updated? And I couldn't, of course, I'm not the most intelligent when it comes to the internet.
Okay, I'm not making this as a recommendation, but I know that this is a meet and confer thing. You've been talking to the union about their acceptance of these 11. But if we said we don't want Placer County, do you have to go back and start it over again, or how would that work?
We would have to go back to the table, and then we would then come back to you again with the. So obviously we didn't bring this. I mean. This is certainly something that we're looking for direction, and you have the ability to say that you want something other than what's here. But we didn't bring this to you until we'd spent a lot of time on it and feel that this is. I think that some of the things you're just talking about, the ways we need to look at this to make sure that these are truly. We factor in different costs that would be advantages to living in this area as related to places like Tahoe or Roseville or whatever. I think. That is terrific, and I think we can absolutely capture that, and that can be a tool that's evaluated so that we can say, we don't need to be again on par with that agency. We can be at a different spot because we have X, Y, and Z that differentiates us. I think that kind of thing. If that's something you're comfortable with, we can certainly incorporate that into this list, and we could move forward with that. If you have even more heartburn about it, then I think we need to go back. We need to go back and meet with the reps, and we'll need to. Spend some more time on it, and then we need to come back, I think, with another recommendation to the board.
I'm said anything about heartburn. I'm satisfied with this list. So am I. So.
Okay. No, and I don't mean that in any derogatory way. I mean, this is not a rubber stamp. This is truly for you guys I'd sure rather put the time in now on this to make sure that people are comfortable with it, because again, when we get out the other side of it, we want to make sure that we can utilize the information we get. And if we're back saying, well, this really wasn't who we should have compared against, then that makes it difficult to get to the finish line.
Well, you've heard three of us say that we are going to hold your feet to the fire to make sure that you do ratchet, put a multiplier or a diminishing multiplier on the wages in those counties because of these factors that you talked about, the price.
But I think any creative actions that are taken, though, will end up being highly disputed in a negotiation environment.
And because one of the things we have to make sure that happens is that we all understand what what you're suggesting, because I have no idea what.
You don't know what I suggested?
You have some kind of list?
I'm not sure why, yeah, we have to have 11, maybe that was a negotiated thing, but I'm totally comfortable with number 1, 6, 8, 9, and 11, which is Amador, Nevada Irrigation, Sacramento Regional, Sac Suburban, and Tuolumne. I think the others, to me, just, they're too different. But again, educate me.
Okay. Well, this has nothing to do with this, but I'm just wondering, you know, I know that you're talking to other counties, other agencies, comparable agencies. Do you ever bring in any other factors like the economic development of that particular county and factor something into this study?
It's a consideration. I mean, it's a great question because I heard some feedback regarding if an area is very commercial, or there's a lot of commercial development, and what might be a different source of revenue and things of that nature. We do get these questions. It's difficult to measure that. So to really say here's a number that we can rank each agency by, based on some of the demographic information of the community. So we feel we've selected a list of factors that is quantifiable and comparable from one agency to another. And again, that includes population and number of employees and budgets and things like that. Other demographic factors, it's certainly often part of the discussion, but it's difficult to quantify. So we think about it, but it's not. Doesn't necessarily drive our decision as to whether to include or not include a certain agency, because some of the other factors that we look at we feel are stronger in sort of showing similarities between agencies. I hope that helps.
I have a couple questions. First of all, in your professional opinion, in doing this study, well, first of all, I would have rather have seen that in hiring a company such as yours to do this type of a study, that it was more independent and less driven by the district and the union and the management confidential group. And that's kind of what I thought we were going for, is we were hiring someone that was coming from the outside and would independently choose these districts and these municipalities and these cities, whether they're regional or not. And that was going to be my second question, is regionality a huge factor in doing this? And I'm asking that, when you do this for other agencies who hire you to do this, is that a major factor?
Regionality absolutely is. What I usually tell my clients, that if I could look at a map and I could draw a 20-mile circle around my client agency, or whatever that distance is that people will reasonably commute. Of course, what's reasonable in one community might be different in another, but let's say it's a 30-mile circle, right? And there were 10 to 12 agencies that are exactly like the client agency, that would be ideal, right? If we had 12 agencies in Calaveras County that are exactly like you, that would be the perfect labor market. In absence of that, unfortunately, we'll have to be a little bit more creative and say, well, where do we go to find agencies that are like you and that do similar things as you do, that are going to have similar jobs that we can compare? And so in many cases, when we do work in geographic areas that are just either not as heavily populated, or if we work for an agency that does unique things, provides unique services like the district does, we usually have to go outside of the immediate labor market to say where else can we go to find comparable jobs. That's one consideration, of course, where the district may be losing talent to, or maybe stealing talent from, is certainly something that we do consider as well. And that's where that was part of the discussion, figuring out, okay, what are some of the districts that will represent other areas in a meaningful way.
Okay, so that does make sense, and our general manager did bring that up earlier in his first comments, that was the major part, so I'm good. I mean, I'm very happy to hear that you're confirming that, and I mean, that does make me a little more comfortable with the fact that each one of these is more regional and not Plumas or Sierra or Mariposa's not that far away. Maybe some consideration should have been given to that area, but
South Tahoe?
yeah, they're well, but
Tracy?
is there an opportunity to have at the same time that you're doing this study, to have a more independent look at it instead of driven through negotiations with everybody.
They can address it. President Ratterman, and you can blame me for this one, for having this in front of you guys and for having it in front of the unions as well, because I've seen where compensation study, the last thing we want to do is get to this report, no matter how great the report any person or may think that it is, and for that report then to be useless to us and simply be a document on the shelf. The point of this is to get the results that we have the most confidence in so that we can develop a implementation, a way that we implement this to address wherever we come down and collectively, that being the board and the unions as well, on how we address the results of it. And, having seen one of these before where I saw an agency that they had turnover in the board, and the board, by the time they got done with the report, the board that was sitting to receive it didn't have confidence in the comparators and decided they weren't going to implement the results of it. They weren't going to utilize it to deal with the compensation, so as a result, instead of using it for its intended purpose, it then became something that created a lot of consternation and actually led to the departure of people on staff because they were frustrated by the outcome. So that's what we're trying to avoid, and this is not, it would be wonderful if it could happen, if it were that scientific, but because this really is something that's nuanced and you can go look at from different perspectives. I will say I'm thrilled that we've got such a talented team and that's working on this, that I think everybody who's been in the room with them knows that they know what they're doing, and the way that they're evaluating the options that we discuss is the correct way to do it. It's the professional, industry accepted way. And so again, I think if we can, get the direction today, then we can move on. They'll go to work. I think it's 6 to 8 weeks to get the initial data back on the different benchmarks at these agencies. Then we start working on completing the actual report itself and coming to this board with a draft, and then get to the really important part of implementing it. And so in any event, that's kind of the thought process behind it.
I have one other question. Typically, are board members involved with some of the earlier negotiation decisions within the circle that you work with on that, or is there a reason why they're not, or is it just beyond their responsibility as a board member?
It's an interesting question. I would say that every agency is a little bit different in that regard. Some boards or city councils I work with are more hands-on than others. Although I will say usually the process is the same as you have in front of you today, where we sit with an internal project management team that usually consists of different stakeholders. We always recommend, we really always go about doing this process the same way, where we come with an initial list of recommendations and then have that iterative process of discussing that list and getting that internal insight, because while I've been doing this for about 15 years now, and I've seen many a water and or wastewater district, and yet I don't have that insight or the detailed knowledge about your organization that's needed to make sure that we identify agencies that are like the district. And so that iterative process is always part of our methodology to make sure that we survey agencies that are meaningful to you all. I've been in a situation before where I've had to come back to a board or city council a second time with changes, but usually I see that there's some kind of a sort of acknowledgement that, okay, yes, the board sees that we've gone through a reasonable process, a reasonable methodology. We've looked at all these different factors and we've come up with a list that we feel comfortable with. I would certainly tell you that if there was an agency on the list that I had heartburn over, I would have made that known. I do see my role as the third-party expert that also sometimes plays the devil's advocate and say, well, maybe this isn't the best path to go. Maybe we should consider something different. So I won't be afraid to speak up and make my opinion heard if I feel like we're doing something that really doesn't feel right. If there was an East Bay Mud or a Santa Clara Valley Water District on the list, I would probably have an issue with that. So,
Right.
yeah.
Well, unfortunately, you weren't at the public meetings. We were going through the rate increase outreach, and could have shared that, your perspective with the folks.
Well, let's kind of take a poll of you guys. Are we going to move forward, or just a quick comment, move forward with this as it's presented?
I'm happy with it.
Mr. President, just with the added, very important note that we're going to make sure we capture that, housing, the cost-related information, to provide that meaningful context for consideration as we get the results, then to determine how we, how we set ourselves against the comparables.
And that'll be with a multiplier of most likely less than 1. Does that make sense?
I understand what you're saying, yeah,
Okay.
and the answer is yes. I mean, usually, when we look at cost of wages or cost of labor, then we determine, a certain range, if it's a percentage point or 2, we usually don't make an adjustment, but if it falls outside, let's say 5% of a differential, then we may actually use an adjustment factor. So
Okay.
we'll look at that carefully and make sure we can do that.
Comments?
I'm fine.
I just have a quick comment. I mean, so far this has been generated by, if you wanted to know how the board talks to the staff, it's through him. And I think we've done that, and we've tried to make it clear that, we're not.
You're talking about we've done it right now.
We've done it, we've been holding negotiations.
We have not seen comparator agencies. I haven't, and maybe you guys have as a different group.
No.
Yeah, we've been waiting.
I don't want to get into any
My point is that you're our
Yeah.
representative at these meetings with
Yes.
the negotiations. That's.
and this is the first time we've had a
And
list.
I
that's
just want to
ready
make it
present.
clear that staff recognizes, because staff so far with you as our representative has generated this list. And I think the board wants to make it clear that it's not going to be an apples to apples. It's not just going to be a total compensation. When we look at any future pay increases or any salaries, we want to see the full picture. And it's not just going to be divided by 11 and here's the average price. That's not going to happen.
No, and that was what we've been talking about, the multiplier.
And I appreciate that perspective, Director Davidson. I think my comment is that obviously this is a negotiation. And, nothing is set in stone during negotiation until you've got resolution. And I'm okay with these 11 going into the negotiation and discussion, but at the same time, as you're saying, there are other factors, and Director Ratterman, you were saying the same thing. There are other factors that I feel is important to bring into the total discussion and wherever those go. So negotiations, you ask for the moon and you settle for your next door neighbors.
Okay, I think we're ready to push forward on this item. Do you have direction to move forward with the 11? We're going to use a multiplier of some sort. And my final comment is I'd like to see as much detail that you come up with as possible, as opposed to less.
That sounds good, I can commit to that.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. President, board members of the board. It just lets you, until, a few days ago, this list was not ready to even, this list was in development to get to this point. So I just want you to know that this is not something we've had and we've been sitting on. This is as soon as we had it ready, we were going to bring it to you to discuss it.
Well, you can let the folks know. I'm a little uncomfortable with it for the reasons that I've stated before. I think it's a little unfair, but I'm willing to accept it for now.
Okay.
But who am I?
Thank you very much.
Thank you
Appreciate
very
it and
much.
look forward to your product.
All right, same here, thanks very much.
All right,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Have a good day.
Okay, moving on, item 4B on our agenda is discussion action regarding Kessel Consulting Engineer Contract Amendment for Engineering and Design Services for the Evans Pass Reach 1 Water Pipeline Replacement Project. Charles Palmer doesn't appear to be in the room today. Looks like Mr. Egerton's taking it.
Thank you. I'm stepping in for Charles today. He's having a medical procedure. So with that, I just wanted to let you know that we do have Jack Scroggs, principal, here from the engineering firm and from Castle, and to answer any questions that you have. This item is to request a change to the contract that we have for the Reach 1 design contract. This is the professional services agreement with Castle Engineering for the engineering design and the environmental work associated with that. Their subconsultant is Ecor Consulting, and they have, just to note some of the things, maybe I'll just go through some of the items here that are in the request. As you'll note, the original amount of the contract was just over $450,000 for their work. This request is for an additional $79,536 to complete this work.
Dave,
Yeah.
I've got a question real quick. This is the second amendment. What was the first amendment financials? What did they ask for in the first amendment? It's probably here, but I don't see it.
Let's see, and where,
Because
trying to
I-
see where it says Second Amendment here. You're
Well, my-
looking at the two amendments from Ecor Consulting, is that?
John's got his hand up there, probably.
Just to clarify that,
Come on up, Jack, to
Okay,
the
sorry.
recording.
I think maybe you're referring to First Amendment and Second Amendment that Ecor had submitted. The First Amendment was for some historical and cultural work that they had requested back in May or June of 2017. And that was approved by staff, but there was no change in the contract amount at that point. This is that amendment together with now their next request is all lumped together into this one request for amendment.
Okay, so the initial one, the task 13, 14, and 15 for $12,950, we've not approved that, and they've received that money for it, and now they're coming a second time again for more money.
It was approved by Charles, it was approved by staff, but
Okay.
it did not go to the board for official.
Because of its value, or the dollar,
Right, the
okay.
cost.
So that was $12,950.
Right, and that's included in this overall total of $79,000.
It's on.
Yeah,
It's
to
not
be
in it.
clear, we're not, that, with the initial approval for that, because that was a singular amendment of that amount, could be approved at a staff level, but now that we have a combined larger amendment to our contract with Castle, and again, remember, Castle is the entity that we're in contract with, Ecor is a sub to
Yeah,
them. But given the magnitude of this one, we wanted to come to the board and obviously get your approval on it. So with that, maybe if, just to go through what is the items that are covered within this request. And Jack, please, if there's anything else you'd like to add, I know you and Charles have been in close discussions over every one of these items. There were actually some reductions in the amount of this. This is not what was originally proposed. It is, I believe it was over 90,000, and now it's down to 79. But there was the additional topo survey services. The initial topographical, the survey work was done by Nordahl consultants that we had retained to do an initial survey. Typically, we would, in a situation like this, and it's not uncommon to do additional survey as you're moving towards completion of design. Typically, this wouldn't be before you because we would be handling this at a staff level as an amendment to our contract with Nordahl to finish their survey work. But in this case, Castle has its own surveyors. They do that work themselves, so they're taking the product that Nordahl provided, and they're completing that work. And it's an appropriate thing to do to complete the survey because there are areas of the alignment that they need to consider in the design. They're outside of the original survey. It's my understanding, Jack, you have about a 20-foot wide swath that you survey, and then as you're designing the project, if you're considering to move outside of those boundaries, and certainly that can make perfect sense to do that to avoid impacts to certain things that we want to avoid, then they need to have additional survey to analyze what the what the conditions are at those locations. So that is my understanding is part of what this is about, and certainly having an accurate survey of the alignment is critically important for us. The additional engineering and, environmental and permitting costs on Ecor, they relate to cultural resources. Jack, it's my understanding part of the requirements on this are because the project, I was under the mistaken belief that because, the 3A project was going through many different parcels of different ownership, different state entities, but primarily local residents, private property. And so my thought was that would make a project like that far more complicated because you have to deal with so many different property owners and you're trying to work within that congested area of the community. In reality, this is actually equally as challenging because we're dealing with state of California property and with federal property as well, which is, my understanding, why some of these additional cultural resource requirements exist.
Yeah, that's,
And
yeah,
why
I would
they-
say it's more challenging than the private landowners, many of which are our customers.
And fine customers they are, yes, yes.
So 90% of the alignment is within Caltrans right away. The last 4,000 feet or so is within US Forest Service property. Now,
Jack, can you come to the microphone so we,
I didn't mean to upstage Mr. Egerton here.
but the camera doesn't get you, the microphones don't get you, we lose half our meeting that's being recorded.
Okay, so just to kind of give you the idea, we're basically working in a corridor that's somewhere in the range of 20 to 100 feet wide. And it's the area between the southerly shoulder of State Route 4 and the right-of-way. So that's the range, the area that we're working. Some places the width is relatively narrow, 20, 30 feet. Some places it's over 100 feet. Okay. So just to kind of explain this first element as far as the survey is concerned, when Nordahl did the initial survey, they flew the area, and there was a considerable amount of area because of the dense tree cover that there just wasn't covered. The trees obscure the ground, there's no ground shots, and as we go through and select alignment, we need to get additional survey work, so we did that.
So
Also,
they didn't do any ground truthy then at all? It was just all aerial?
correct. They did, I think they did some, but not to the extent of that was ultimately needed for the alignment. I think you're going to appreciate, Director Strange, that a project such as this, about 5 miles of pipeline, there are a number of iterations that occur as you go along, design iterations to avoid environmental, cultural, trees,
I've walked that entire
utilities.
corridor, yeah, I'm familiar with it.
And so, where there might have been a preliminary alignment that had been identified, that did get shifted to avoid trees, environmental, cultural, utilities. And in some of those cases, we did not have topo coverage, so we went out and got a supplemental topo. That was part of it. The other part is that as part of this project, excuse me, this pipeline, excuse me, serves not only your customers on the south side of the road, it also serves the highway, it also serves your customers on the north side of the highway. And so where we are constructing new crossings, we need to have, Caltrans would not allow us to open cut the highway, so we need to do bore and case crossings across the highway. So there was a number of alternatives as where one could reasonably locate bore pits and receiving pits. And so there was no surveys done on the south side, no survey information available on the north side. And so we had to supplement that with, once those were selected finally, we needed to go out and survey that. Again, it's an iterative process, and we utilized Nordahl survey. It was all good information. It's just that a lot of areas, because of terrain and because of cover and because of alternate alignments, they just weren't covered. So it became clear as we went through on the design, part of our scope was to locate the trees that are arborist tagged, as far as trees that could potentially be impacted by the alignment. So as we did that, then we also did supplemental surveys rather than have another surveyor come in and do those supplemental surveys. We truly thought that we could cover those costs, but as we went through several iterations of design and the cost, our total survey cost is about $56,000. So it was more than we could absorb within our contract. So that's the first element then, is that cost, which was adjusted down to deduct that portion which was the tree location. And then we also kind of negotiated a reduction in costs with Charles, because ultimately our potholing costs were less than what we estimated in our contract. So that was another kind of a deduct that we took from the survey costs. So that's the first item, there's the surveys. The second item that Mr. Egerton alluded to is the environmental The first one was some additional cultural work that needed to be done, and unfortunately, it was in an area on U.S. Forest Service property, so that required some additional permitting and a work by ECOR in order to be able to do that. That was that first amendment of about $12,950. And then, as part of ECOR's initial proposal, and their total on this was about $115,000, their total of the 451. They had an optional cost in there for 1602 permit, fish and game permit, fish and wildlife. At the time that they put together their proposal, it was not clear whether or not we were actually going to need a 1602 permit. Turns out we do. And so they had identified at the front end, if permit is required, then there would be additional costs. That's the $8,555. And then the third item, they are experiencing higher permitting costs, both from Fish and Wildlife and Corps of Engineers. And so they initially asked for an additional $15,000. That was pared down to $6,545, so that the $8,555 plus the $6,545 was a total of $15,000. That was something that Charles negotiated out. So those are the two biggest items of this request. The third item was had to do with the stormwater pollution prevention plan. And to their credit, Thunder Mountain Enterprises did a phenomenal job on the SWIP. I think one of the issues that the district faced in the Evans Reach 3 project was that the SWIP, which I think was done by the contractor, was not nearly as detailed as was required. And so CCWD required that Thunder Mountain Enterprise be the stormwater pollution prevention plan consultant. Their original cost was about $8,000. They asked for an additional $4,000. Charles negotiated down to $2,500. Again, their SWIP plan is the most detailed SWIP plan I've ever seen in 45 years. It's a phenomenal plan, and so I'm sure that it will pay dividends to the district as you go forward with construction, as far as the coordination, as far as the stormwater pollution prevention plan. The last item is geotechnical. Condor, who's our geotechnical consultant, had initially proposed a scope of work which it was in 2 phases. We did the first phase, or had them do the first phase, which is kind of an overview of the soils and geotechnical characteristics of the project. Then they had proposed that they would do kind of random potholes along the route of the alignment to characterize the subsurface conditions. We suggested that doing 20 or 30 potholes in 5 miles probably wasn't going to be a lot of really useful information. And so what we suggested to them is that the area that was probably the most uncertain for the contractors was going to be at the location of the bore pits, because it's in those locations that they have to be able to dig a hole, probably 6 to 7 feet deep, 30 by 10 feet across. And it would be in those areas that they would probably have the most angst as far as what the subsurface conditions would be. So they came back with a proposal just to do geotechnical work at those 5 bore and receiving pit locations. Their second phase proposal was higher than what they had initially, and so that's the difference of 5,600, 5,633. So those are the 4 components. It's surveying costs, which, again, I can't speak how much Lee Nordahl would have charged the district, but there certainly would have been additional costs to have Lee Nordahl go back out. It made sense for us to be able to do that. ECOR, their environmental costs, the SWIP costs, which was relatively minor, and then the geotechnical costs.
Thank you, Jerry.
Thank you.
Any further questions? I mean, the last thing just to note is that as the owner of a project like this, public agency owner, There's an implied covenant in our construction contract that we are representing the accuracy and completeness of the design, the specifications of the project that are bid. And so that's something that weighs on me and Charles, I know, in trying to make sure that we weigh. Obviously, we don't want to overpay or spend on anything that isn't unnecessary. We don't think is warranted or we shouldn't be bringing forward to the board. But at the same time, we recognize we really have to have a tight set of bid specs when we come out on the other side of this, so that we really have are in the best position to complete the construction project on time, on budget, and avoid that exposure to risk if we don't have complete and accurate plans.
So do you think that it's the bid specs then that require this additional 17.6% of the initial cost increase on that? Is it because the bid specs weren't detailed enough that now we have this other amendment we have to?
No, by bid specs, I mean the construction, the bid set, including the design of this project, that
Right.
is what Jack and his team are working on. I'm talking about the documentation for the bidding documents that we're going to be going out with later this year for requests for bids on the construction project. And I'm just, all of these things play, if you don't, in some way, shape or form, I mean, some of these obviously are driven by regulatory requirements, but some of the stuff, is driven by the desire to have as complete and accurate a design and specifications for the project that we can incorporate into the RFB that we go out for bid, and that we can, know that the bid that the contractor is putting forward is based on highly reliable information. If there's any unknown or ambiguity or uncertainty within the bid documents that we put out there, it's more than likely that we will be held responsible for costs associated with that.
We'll judge this expenditure based on change orders future.
In the construction project.
Well, yeah, I mean, I
Yeah.
just see this as significant. 17%, I mean, right off the bat from the initial, it's like, wow. And I would encourage all factors to negotiate or sharpen pencils on that. One of the things that Jack had mentioned is, and it may or may not be the most accurate from the standpoint of on the ground, but the idea of changing the route because of environmental issues. The 1602 permits are stream bed and lake bed alteration permits, which means you're now going through a wetland, and you require those, as well as the Army Corps. So if we were avoiding environmental, i.e. wetland issues, I would expect that to not be an issue, or certainly the 8,000 additional cost on the 1602 permits from E-Corps, and again, I'm not originally involved, but I do 1602 permitting all the time. I've got 3 of them going on right now, but nevertheless, those are costs that E-Corps should probably take a closer look at, unless for whatever reason, because of the redesign, now they're going through more ditches in ephemeral or seasonal channels and things like that.
Dave, do you have,
They'll respond to that.
or are you going to respond to the 1602 permit?
Yeah, just real quickly, yes, the alignment avoids to the maximum extent possible the wetlands that were identified and delineated. So that's clear. The issue was that the pipeline will unavoidably intercept some side waters that drain from, get my direction straight, from south to north. And the Fish and Wildlife determined that those were in fact contributory to the stream channel, and that therefore a permit would be required, even though we are avoiding to the maximum extent possible the wetlands, which would avoid Corps of Engineers permitting or reduce Corps of Engineers permitting. There still was sufficient, in Fish and Wildlife's opinion, that we were cutting across drainage channels and side waters, I think that's the best way I can describe it, that do contribute to the overall flow of downstream creeks.
Right. Yeah,
And
but
so therefore, 1602 permitting was required, and what what ECOR had originally proposed is that a 1602 notification would be a alternate item, was not included in their original proposal as a base cost.
That was a bad choice. That was a bad decision.
And that's.
I mean, 5 miles and you're not gonna impact, come on. So anyway, I mean, you gotta go back to them and say, hey, come on, guys, how can you do this? I mean, are you just trying to get the job, so you low bid it and then you come back and hit us, or what? I'm uncomfortable with that, but I'm uncomfortable with a few things apparently.
The 9 competing bids that came in on this originally, how was this contract awarded to Castle in the first place? Was
Yeah,
it-
in a
was it
professional-
the lowest bid?
No, that, I mean, I can't tell you off the top of my head whether this was the lowest price, but just generally on the award of any professional service agreement, including a design contract, the low price is not the determining factor. We consider a number of factors. Price is one of those, but it's also the project team, their approach to the project, their experience on other similar type projects. All of those things go into, because basically, you know, there are many other factors. It's not like the construction project where by law we are obligated to take the low price. In the event of with consultants or professional consultants, there's a wide range of experience and expertise, and we're looking for what is of best value to the district. So that was a determination that was made. So the fact that the price of this contract is changing doesn't, even if this had been what was initially proposed, it very well still may have been the selection is the best value, because that would have been one factor, an important factor, but certainly not the only factor.
Bertha?
Because I'm thinking of the route. We're talking about 5 miles, and it's, Terry can vouch for, just how, there aren't a lot of trees.
Well, the reason I was in there is while they were removing the hazard trees as part of the Caltrans project 2 years ago. I walked all of that, both sides, north and south.
Right.
The whole thing. And there are wetlands in there. There are stream channels. So I just find it amazing that an environmental firm would not include 1,600 permits in a bid to do that kind of work. And that's my issue.
I'm uncomfortable with an $80,000 change order that I understand was larger at one point and already has been negotiated down some. I'm very uncomfortable with that. We went through a bidding process, we got a bid, accepted the bid, and change orders, come. This is several change orders are necessary on this particular project from several different angles. I'm a little uncomfortable with it.
Well, and when we were hearing the presentation, or when you were telling us, Dave, you talked about how much Charles had negotiated different parts of this, and, he did come up with, he should have come up with $80,000 more.
Well,
Yeah.
No, he is a hard negotiator, bargainer for us. I know he doesn't take any of this lightly on anything that we spend money on. I would say that I firmly believe this work is necessary for us to successfully complete this design so that we can get out to bid.
I have no doubt with that, Dave.
And I know, and some of the questions, Terry, that you're asking, I mean, it really does, certainly these are factors that we can all consider next time in evaluating proposals that we receive on other projects.
I don't know how many
Experience
local
here.
consultants were offered the opportunity to provide a bid.
Yeah, I believe, I do not like presenting change orders. Sometimes they are a good tool to get things done in a way that saves us money and time on projects. But in this circumstances, this is not something I enjoy presenting to the board, but I do believe it's necessary. And the risk for us is far greater on the construction phase of this project. And having the complete, accurate plans and specifications and design drawings is essential to that.
Yeah. Can I ask one more question, please?
Go ahead,
Because
and then
additional-
Russ has a question afterwards.
Additional survey cost is $43,000, and you said that, I forget which company did the survey?
The initial survey was Nordahl, and just because this is something this request actually, which is the bulk of this is something we would be
Right.
paying, because typically we would be paying this directly to Nordahl. to do a subsequent, to do follow-up work based on their initial survey. That's not something that typically the board would see because of the amount involved. It's because it's rolled up into this larger contract with a larger change order. So, you know, I just, to be clear, that seems entirely reasonable, appropriate, and obviously necessary to get it done, and we would be paying for somebody else to do it if not these guys. So.
Russ?
I would just like to ask, Dave, maybe you can explain this to me, but Mr. Skoggs has a final sentence in his request that if the district can approve the additional fees as outlined, we believe we can complete the Evans Pass Phase 1 design contract with CCWD without significant write-down. What does significant write-down mean?
I believe that's what Jack was talking about, that those additional costs related to, I believe it was the survey work you were talking about, the $54,000 of additional costs they've incurred above and beyond their initial scope and budget. Just those, you know, expenses that they're not able to recoup by an additive to the contract today. So I'm guessing, Jack, there's probably other costs that you're incurring that are not part of this that you're gonna
Right, I mean,
you're gonna just live with, and
yeah,
that's,
essentially,
yeah.
we would have to absorb those costs.
Okay, so
Our own.
write-down is roughly synonymous
Means
with,
a deduction.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we have a contract, and that's what our contract amount is.
Okay, well, you may recall that when we talked about approving the $450,000 contract, I raised the issue that there was a discrepancy about the number of potholes. So thank you for refunding $2,000 on the potholes. That's good. Appreciate it.
Yeah, and there was, we probably ended up, just as an aside, as it turned out, we did, in addition to the potholing, we did ground penetrating radar, which probably turned out to be much more effective. So between the ground penetrating radar, the potholes, and the number of repairs that were actually documented by the staff, and they had shown the location of those repairs, which obviously that's where the existing pipe is, probably 50 repairs that we found. So between that and the ground penetrating radar and the potholes, there was probably 120 data points out there as far as where the existing pipe is located.
Okay. I'm curious about, you mentioned the under the highway penetrations, and in determining where to put those, did you find that you had made the initial assumptions was a little bit off because of what you found in trying to locate the rock and stuff?
Well, I think that clearly the first assumption is that the new pipe is going to be placed as close as possible to where the existing crossings are now located, because we need to be able to connect to the pipeline on the other side. I can only guess that when those pipelines were constructed initially, they were open cut across the roadway. So now we have a situation where that's typically not permitted, and I don't think anyone would be too excited about this open cutting across State Route 4. So we need to be able to get obviously as close as we can to where that existing crossing is located, but to find areas which are constructible as far as being accessed for a boring equipment and receiving equipment. So yes, and we did locate those, and those are now on the plans.
Okay, now my final question on this relates to the ECOR documentation, and you read this thing and it says repeatedly that our like $6,650 does not include. Has all this work been done, or are we still looking at the possibility of significant increases?
The ECOR work, I mean, the environmental document is, has been adopted by the board, and it's, as far as I know, it's out for distribution. I've not heard of any comments coming back from reviewing agencies. I can check that with ECOR. It has been accepted by Caltrans, which was the biggest hurdle. And so that work has been completed. As far as all of the permitting, that's the only item that still remains. Ecor is now confident that they can complete the permitting without significant additional costs. I mean, they understand that if they have to have write-downs some on their own, that's part of the process of being a consultant. But, you know, they were basically asking for a budget to work with, and that was not acceptable, or additional budget to work with, that was not acceptable to Charles, so that was reduced down, so.
And I think that what you're referring to is kind of the language that's on their amendment, like under Amendment 1, it says this cost proposal and has a list of what it doesn't include. Some of those things, I think gotcha, but some of the things that this says it doesn't include, I think, are things that would be, if there were other things that have yet to be found that would come into play. So, I mean, we could grant them a contract amendment that assumes every worst-case scenario with a much larger budget, but I think it's probably prudent not to do that, and instead, if in fact some other circumstances we don't know about today are discovered, then we deal with them and we try to deal with it as efficiently and as inexpensively as we possibly can. So.
Well, it's upsetting to me on the 1602 costs. I just feel like that should have been addressed at the very beginning. And for me to support this adjustment, I would like to have, or like to see some more discussions with the consultant on both 2B and 2C to try to reduce those numbers even more. And, you know, again, I just don't understand why at least the 1602 wasn't part of the initial proposal.
Jack, I think you said that the 1602 sounds like that was an optional item in their proposal?
Correct.
So we had the option, I guess, when we awarded the contract to award it with the assumption either way, either that there would be the permits or there wouldn't. So I hear what you're saying, because you're saying that based on your experience and, you know, they should have known that should have been part of it, but you know, maybe it was on our end to have had a detailed, further discussion with them, and maybe we should have just, you know, presumed that those were going to be necessary and check that box on our part to add that to the proposal.
Or does
but
it
at least
mean
it was disclosed in the
right.
proposal. It wasn't just that it was ignored entirely, or, you know.
Or if it's an option or optional, does that mean some other firm can do it at a much less expense?
Don't know.
They have to do it. I don't know, but I mean, $15,000 is the total, and so.
Yeah, just to be clear, to support what Mr. Egerton is saying, when we submitted our proposal, we also attached, because it was the biggest subcontract cost, their breakdown, their being Ecor's breakdown, and they had 11 tasks, which totaled $115,000, and then they had an optional 1602 notification, which was the 8555. I mean, it was included in the material that were submitted as part of our proposal with them as a sub. So it was disclosed at the front end that should that be required, this is what be the additional cost they would be asking for.
So they didn't think it would necessarily be required when they had originally put their bid in. And that's where I'm just like, really? I'm just
Well, okay.
kind of.
Again, it was incumbent on us as part of the design to avoid, which we have done, as many of the obvious, you know, wetlands issues that were apparent in the time that we were putting together the proposal, which we did do. And the final alignment does in fact do that. So I think the question is, you know, we're not crossing any streams. We're not specifically, we are crossing drainage ways.
Class 1 streams based on the California Department of Forestry.
Okay. I will yield to your knowledge on
Or
that.
Class 3, I'm sorry.
Okay. That, in their opinion, that because the project during construction could impact these drainage courses which contributed to the stream flow, that a notification was required. That was not obvious at the time that they put together their proposal.
But when they put together their proposal to, it was a sub-bid to you, to
Correct.
Castle, correct? And it included that optional 8555, and that number was not added to your $451,000
Correct.
final, okay.
That's correct.
So even though we were aware of it, that it was a decision, a weighing, a balancing, or it had
It was an ad that became apparent during the process of their field research and their discussions with Fish and Wildlife, yes.
So Fish and Wildlife initiated the requirement for this.
Right, and so.
After the contract was signed, so it wasn't a concrete item until Fish and Wildlife said it is gonna be one, we're gonna require it, because you might potentially impact these wetlands.
No, because you will impact them.
Well, okay, if I may, just a clarification. So this was their breakdown, sorry for the poor copy. You see, this is this optional cost. So their total did not include the optional cost.
Yeah, we get it, we get that.
Yeah,
Okay, well, thank you.
okay, again, it's,
And then the other part of this, the only thing I'm curious about is, now, the big bulk of this increase is the surveying that's gonna be
Survey, yeah.
overseen. What, Jim, because I thought I heard you say typically that's something that we would be doing, and, paying somebody else. What initiated the handover of that?
Yeah, typically, Nordall is our on-call surveyor, local surveyor, and we use them extensively. So it's my understanding it's not every engineering design firm that would have its own surveyors available to it as part of its team. So it would be most common for us to complete the survey and any supplementary work associated with that. So we would have our surveyor under our own separate contract that would be there working with them, and we would add additional scope and budget to theirs as needed. But in this case, they happen to have that on staff, so we're paying it through this contract.
And then
Okay, and
that-
with that
Oh.
said, the 451, it was add on the
Good.
same, the 451,659 included how much for surveying?
none.
Zero.
Because, I'll just read what the request for proposal said. It said, an initial topographic survey has been completed, and the district already has the survey files available in AutoCAD format for consultant's review. In the event that the consultant requires additional survey points and features captured by the topographic survey, the district will pay the cost for a professional land surveyor to return to the site to update the survey files recorded.
So we just
So
didn't,
all
we
we
didn't
did
actually
was,
have it.
yeah,
Was it because
Oh, yeah.
of the Nordall work was not thorough enough? Or was it because?
No, they do outstanding work. This is normal, that this has to be done. It's just, who do we choose? Do we use the same firm, Nordall, that prepared the initial, or do we have them do it with their own? They happen to have their own staff who can do it, which again is not the norm, but since we have that, this is an efficient way to get it done.
and this could have been a separate bill on its own to
It
us.
could have been, with a different.
Well,
Or
I
it could
think
have been included in the initial.
the confusing part of your letter, Jack, is the additional survey cost. It's additional to what other survey cost, or was there any other survey
No,
costs
he
included?
said
Okay,
no.
maybe that's poorly stated. It was survey costs, which we included no survey costs in our.
Yeah, he
initial
said none.
proposal.
Okay,
Zero.
Yeah.
okay.
Because of this statement. Now, again, it became very clear that, and again, I'm sorry, Charles is not here, that there were a lot of gaps in the initial survey. Again, you're talking about 5 miles, corridor, which again ranges from 20 to 120 or so feet wide, where there's a lot of areas where the ground is just not visible because of tree cover. I guess I would take a little bit of an exception. I think there was a statement that there's not that many trees out there. Well, our arborists identified 1,200 trees of size of 8 inches or larger that were within the area that we had initially identified for the alignment. So there's a lot of trees there. And there's areas because of tree cover plus the severity of the slopes that the ground is just not visible, not evident in the survey files. So as we go through the design, again, design is an iterative process. I wish that I could look at 5 Mile Corridor and say, this is exactly where the pipeline is supposed to go and it's not gonna move.
But you're coming like this and like this.
Well, yes, and because of trees, trying to avoid as many trees as possible, because of topography, we don't want to put the pipeline on a steep slope, because of the other utilities, because this is not the first utility in this alignment. There's underground power and there's overhead power, and there's your existing pipeline, which we're trying to keep in and it has to remain in service while the new pipeline gets constructed. So, and there's other structures, and there's culture, and there's environmental, so the design, we went through preliminary design, had environmental review it, had an arborist go out and tag trees along this corridor. We went back out with staff, with not only engineering staff, but with distribution staff. They suggested changes. We've gone back out to relocate features. So all of these things have required, in some instances, that we've had to go back and do additional survey. So that has been the additional cost.
Yeah, my comment about not many trees was, that's a stretch that I drive all the time, and so there are.
As many as, comparatively,
Yeah.
yes. Relatively, there's probably areas that are more wooded, yes, I understand.
Any other questions from the board?
Well, I think maybe we could have a review of this at the engineering committee, just how, how the preparation for this caused this, because this isn't something that anybody wants to be comfortable with, is, voting for a 17% increase in a particularly a preliminary bid like this, but it just seems like some things got missed, so perhaps we could have an engineering committee discussion about how the, particularly I want to know, when the decision on the surveying should have been made. If we knew that was going to be an additional cost, we probably should have had that at least as a, have that determined before we issued this contract, and it would have probably saved a lot of heartache here. So,
I would support that.
I will support that also. I'm a little bit more comfortable with the survey cost of $43,453 and the 1602 notification, known as an optional item. And it's the other items I'd like to have the engineering committee take a look at.
Yeah.
well,
I just
I'm
want to
not
make
saying
sure.
that's not what I asked for.
Okay, so,
You just want to do a post analysis.
Yeah, I want to know, how this all went down, why it, because it doesn't seem very clean, and I'm used to these things being a lot cleaner, so.
okay, so what does that do by holding it back, or,
I'm not asking, I never made a request to hold this back. I want to make a motion to approve it here a little bit. What I asked for
Oh,
was
okay.
simply having a review of why we left out, why this survey cost was left out, why we decided not to use our own staff, and then again, I think Terry brings up a good point about the wetlands permitting. I understand it was in the agreement, and it maybe to the board just didn't pay attention when we saw the original
Right.
agreement that would be an additional cost, and we should have recognized it probably. If we knew there was wetlands up there, we probably should have known that there was gonna be a study having to be done with that, so.
I'd feel a whole lot more comfortable that having this engineering committee taking a look at this and have it mean something at the end, instead of having a motion to approve this at this point. I don't think there's any big reason to hold this up till our next meeting, let the engineering committee meet between now and then provide us with some recommendations.
So you do want to hold it up?
That's what I know there's a motion sitting here right
How quickly,
now.
how quickly do we have to act on this? Can we?
well, that's what
can we
I
pull
wanted
it?
to know about. Yeah,
I completely understand where you're coming from, and I think if there's lessons to be learned, there's different ways we can do this. We probably will not include the survey work within the design engineering contract anymore. And we will make the assumptions on when we see optionals like this, we will assume that most likely, and, we'll confirm it, but we'll make sure we include that stuff up front. But I would ask that we move forward with this. I don't want to do anything in any way that would delay or
Right.
confuse the process of completing the design. We're on a fast track to get this project out for bid by the end of the year, which is necessary to get a firm on board that can be in construction at the beginning of next construction season. I think that a lot of the concerns are the way that things were sequenced and the pricing, but I feel like what we have here in the way of the prices are fair. We're getting services of value, and you know, I think that what we discussed in the engineering committee can certainly happen and will happen, and we will incorporate that. But I would ask that we be able to move forward at this point.
Well, let me ask one question of Jack. Is not paying this bill at this point in time, will that slow the project down?
Well, essentially, we're at 90+% design,
Okay.
which is also, we're about at budget too,
I
so.
mean, we're talking about 2 or 3 weeks of an opportunity to take a look at this. And not having this $80,000 for your firm, is that going to slow this project down?
It would,
By 30 days.
it would hold up our request for payment, let's put it that way.
Right.
Yeah, so,
And he's saying yes.
But I want to remind you, we want to get this out to bid by the end of winter. You know, it's darn near September,
Need to get going.
you know.
Yeah.
I mean, essentially, just to make it clear, Mr. President Radaman, is that piece that's left for us to be able to finish this job, we basically spent on the surveying. So we have no money left to finish it. We'll finish it. I mean, you know, but we have no money left in the budget to do it.
I think delaying this for a few weeks is not going to jeopardize being able to complete and go out to bid by the end of the year.
Again, it's certainly the decision of the board, but I don't think this is the reputation that we wanted.
I'll make a motion that we adopt this resolution authorizing a contract amendment with Castle Consulting Engineers for additional work in engineering and other professionals for the design of Evans Pass Reach One Water Replacement Project, CIP 11085.
I second.
Can we share?
And recognize that I do want to have
Yeah.
a thorough go over this. I mean, I can already think of some you know, I mean, if there's a swing, we should have a spread of base contract price and then optional prices. So we recognize that, and if it's the 450 and then, you know, 485, because a lot of these requirements do come in after the fact, they're unknown, and but adding the surveying to this is, I really
Yeah.
think, what got everyone's concern up, because it brought it to a really high change order number that no one's comfortable with. But I don't want to, I mean, with construction costs rising and everything, I don't want to delay the project, you know, and then lose a season over it, so.
This may be inappropriate, and I apologize for this, but I would say that it would be more normal for the design contract to include surveying. And so if it had included surveying at the front end, I think most of this discussion would have been taken care of.
Right.
Okay. Well, thank you, Jack. Thank you, Dave, for your time. Any public comment on this item? Any further discussion here? Do we have a motion and a second? Rebecca, you take roll?
Director Strange?
No.
Director Davidson?
Yes.
Director Thomas?
Yes.
Director Underhill?
Yes.
President Harden?
No. Okay, the item passes. We're on to new business, item 4.
Can we take a break for 5 minutes?
We got a request for a 5-minute break. Let's,
Well, Carl, are you ready?
Yeah, no shit, girl.
You.
Okay, we're back in session. Item, we're looking at item 4C, presentation of the draft Copper Cove Water System Master Plan, CIP project. Bob Goodwin, our senior civil engineer, is here to present with Carl Brewster. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, directors, or I should say young, handsome, and, you know, vibrant directors. We have a presentation by our...
You have to address me also, though.
We have a presentation by Carl Brewstead with PBI concerning the draft Copper Cove Water System Master Plan. This is the last of the 4 master plans that the district has embarked on, 2 related to wastewater and 2 related to water for the communities of Lock and Tennis / Jenny Lynn, and then for the Copper Cove community. The slides we'll hopefully go through them relatively quickly. And at the conclusion of the presentation, I just want to tell you that we posted this online, and staff are also assembling comments as well, and we'll come back with we'll come back with a final version which addresses your comments as well as staff's comments for a second presentation. No actions required by you today.
Great, thanks, Bob. Again, I'm Carl Brewstad with Peterson Brewstad. Appreciate the opportunity to present to you guys the draft water master plan for Copper Cove. First, just kind of talk about the goals and objectives of the water master plan. One is to identify the surface area and facilities, identify the system design criteria, evaluation of facilities and key findings, and then the ultimate culmination is in the capital improvement plan. Goals and objectives, to update the water master plan, we're going to update the hydraulic model, identify system deficiencies, prepare capital improvement plan, project future growth, infill, and water demands, and ultimately identify near-term and build out infrastructure improvements. A little background on the Copper Cove water system. The service area currently serves a population of approximately 4,400 customers or individuals. You have 2,562 connections. The service area encompasses just over 5,000 acres with 10 different pressure zones. Existing infrastructure includes 5 MGD water treatment plant, 5 water tanks, 4 pump stations, approximately 54 miles of pipe, and a raw water intake pump station.
Carl, I just got to say that 10 pressure zones in this one service area, how does that compare to, say, a Valley agency or, other? I just want to know, this is a really important difference between us and other agencies that most people don't get, but every pressure zone has its own challenges, meaning all the infrastructure related to that is going to have to be different to accommodate those pressures.
Yes, you're correct, Dave. We do planning studies for several agencies in the Valley as well, and most of those systems have very few pressure zones, 1 or 2. Mountain counties, mountain agencies are very unique in that you have such a large variation of topography, elevation differences across your systems, which require multiple pressure zones and make the modeling much more difficult, make operations much more complicated. So these systems are unique with all the pressure zones, and part of the modeling effort is to look at opportunities to possibly provide some efficiencies, and working with Bob and Charles, some of the improvements that we're looking at here, can we avoid pumping up to a higher elevation and bypass it and save pumping costs? So those are things that we will look at, or we've looked at. Demand projections. So in developing the water master plans, we have to come up with the demands of how we're going to model the system. The most common trend as of late is to make sure your planning efforts are consistent in the modeling side with your urban water management plans. So this was a specific effort here to make sure all our demands were consistent with the 2015 urban water management plan update. And so that's basically what this slide shows, is the existing demands. We utilize those demand projections from the urban water management plan and apply them to the existing system. And for the future growth areas, for the build-out model, we use the same build-out projections from the urban water management plan. Current demands, average day demands, about 1.6 MGD, million gallons per day. Max day is about 2.7, and then at build out, we're projecting that to increase to 5.4 MGD on the average day and 11.9 on a max day.
Is that the same, are you multiplying it by the same factor for the
Between
average
and
day
max
and the maximum?
No, there was a
maximum day?
difference in the existing, to make it consistent with the urban water management plan, the multiplier was less. And we talk about that in the report.
Okay.
But again, our goal was to be consistent with the urban water management plan. One of the things I think I'd talk about maybe in a future slide is the LAFCO service area boundary for the service area had changed since the 2005 water master plan. It's actually been downsized some. So the build-out population with the current service area boundary is just over 16,000. So taking these demand projections, we took the existing model, updated it to include any changes since 2005, since it was originally developed, and came up with two different model scenarios. We had the existing scenario, which represents your current conditions, and then we also developed the build-out scenario. The existing model is used to assess your existing facilities, how they're meeting your design standards. And then we developed the build-out model to project what the future distribution requirements are going to be. And so if there are any replacements of facilities, you would replace them to meet build-out conditions, for pipes especially. The system design criteria that was utilized in our assessment basically comes right from the district standards. Water treatment plants can be sized to meet max day demand. Storage, you have operational, emergency, and fire flow requirements that are consistent with the district standards. Raw distribution pump stations are sized to meet the max day demand with the largest pump out of service. Distribution system design criteria, we have a peak hour demand velocity of 5 feet per second. Want to make sure we keep it below 5 feet per second. Max day demand plus fire velocity of 10 feet per second. Low pressure areas, we want to make sure we keep the system pressures above 40, and for high pressure, we want to try to keep the pressure below 120 PSI. Fire flow assessment for this area, the fire flow demands were determined to be 1,000 GPM for residential and 1,500 for commercial industrial. So utilizing that design criteria, we assess the existing system. Water treatment plant currently is adequately sized to meet the demands. The only deficiencies identified there were with the clear well. There were some, I think, structural needs on the clear well for the roof.
Directors, I would point out, our design criteria for this report and the earlier report for Jenny Lynn, there is one vulnerability more specific to this area. We are assuming that our firm capacity of the water treatment plant, the firm capacity assumes that both of the filters at that unit are available should one of them fail, where we lose half the plant. So there is some vulnerability in rating the firm capacity at 4 when you could argue it's 2 if you assume the largest treatment unit's out of service during max day.
Storage facilities, the existing storage facilities, there's a B1 and B2 tank. The B1 is the redwood tank, and that's identified as needing to be replaced. The B2 tank has some coating failure issues, so that's identified to get rehabilitated. Raw water and distribution pump stations. The raw water pump station does not meet the firm capacity design criteria, so that's in improvement that was identified. The second issue with the raw water pump station is, I think in 2015, the intake was lowered into the lake due to the low level of the reservoir. That's caused some water quality impacts, and so that's something that operations staff have asked us to look at, and there's going to be an improvement identified in there as well.
I was going to add, on these slides where you see that there are recommendations related to the existing facilities and their deficiencies, PBI worked with myself and the rest of the district staff in that area to collate and assemble a list of the facilities with known issues. And you may or may not be aware that we've had some issues with the pumps when they were lowered because of the concern of the dead pool elevation being dropped in Tulloch, that the water quality has actually changed in the lake at that elevation, and operationally we've been struggling with the higher manganese levels in our raw water. So our staff want to put it back to where it was, or Bill wants to move it back.
Well, not, yeah, that, you just say that kind of in jest, we still need to have access to the lower pump to be able to, in the case of a extreme event like we thought that could happen in the last time in the extreme drought and the lowering of the lake. So that still will be a vital asset that we'll have. The desire would be to operate more regularly at a higher elevation so we don't have the water quality challenges.
There's no way that you can have, if you have a single pipe going down, you can't valve it remotely so that you have two points from which to draw, a lower point and a higher point?
I may be speaking a little out of turn since Jesse would have more of the specifics. I believe we actually own the pumps to install pumps or keep the existing pumps at their current location and put pumps in the old location, and through piping allow us to draw from either elevation, but it's still, there is a significant cost in getting the divers out to install the new pumps and the necessary electrical improvements so that we can send current or electricity to the 4 units. But this is something that operations is aware of.
The same, Russ, they probably get a box of rocks at them. A snorkel and a box of rocks.
Well, again, it sounds like it's a learning experience that initially, when we replaced those pumps, we should have thought about leaving ones in place and adding to it, if that was a possibility. I don't know, maybe.
Well, I think at the time it was all executed as an emergency project, that we were not given very much notice by Tridams, their intent, which they never executed.
Okay, so to continue, the other raw water or distribution pump station improvement identified is for the C pump, and this is the pump that pumps from the B tank to the C tank. It does not meet firm capacity either. During the assessment, there were opportunities identified where we could minimize the pumping from B tank to C tank. C tank's at a higher elevation and gravity feed a larger portion of the Saddle Creek area. And so that was something that's been identified as an improvement that would minimize the C pump station requirements. Distribution system, there were some deficiencies identified where the system did not comply with the design criteria, and we'll go through those a little further here. Some of the low pressure areas, this is a map of the distribution system. The red highlights there are the areas of low pressure. All of these can be addressed through some pipeline improvements, and those are included in the recommended improvements. On the opposite side of the spectrum here, we have the high pressure areas, and these are usually areas at basically lower elevations within pressure zones. The only way we can address these is to add additional PRVs or stick with using localized PRVs on the customer services.
Carl, on those other two, there are a lot of colors on the map and only two, or at least what I see, as far as the legend.
The colors are all the different pressure zones.
Oh, okay. So there's just two, let's see, the one area below in the,
Which you would look, this is the high pressure one.
either below 120 or above 120.
So above 120 is the enlarged red dots.
Oh, okay, got it.
So if you're looking at that green area, it's just that lower left.
Yeah, no, I was caught on all the other colors in there and not being on the legend. Now I understand.
So what dots? Kind of going back to what Dave was talking about earlier, with each pressure zone, you're
Right.
going to have a whole different, what they
Right.
would refer to as a hydraulic grade line. So that may be based off the elevation of the tank typically. Continuing on the distribution system deficiencies, these are the pipelines that did not meet the velocity requirements. One of the pipelines is the BC transmission main. This is the main between the B tank and C tank, where a large volume of flow is transferred. The other is areas within the below the C tank. And again, these can all be addressed through pipeline improvements. And then also the proposed modified C tank pump station. So the culmination of the report, we came up with a capital improvement plan. We developed a 3-phase plan. Each phase covers 5 years. These are currently part of the draft, will probably be refined based off of some preliminary input from the district. Phase 1 right now, the immediate improvements would be to improve the water treatment plant Clearwell, replace the Redwood tank, the B tank 1, do the B tank 2 improvements, rehabilitate that tank, and then the C1 and Saddle Creek transmission main. And this is a transmission main between B tank and C tank that would not only improve the distribution from B tank to C tank, but also allow gravity distribution to Saddle Creek, a portion of Saddle Creek.
Though staff is talking about that project, there are some issues about that project that may not appear in the final version. I and Charles have a difference of opinion on whether it's viable or not.
And then the phase 2 improvements, if in the draft plan, there's a couple loop pipelines that were identified in discussions with staff where we could provide a secondary service to the area east of the lake that right now is served by a single main that goes under the lake. And then that would be the B4 loop, and then the C4 loop would allow the B tank to gravity feed the area just north of the lake.
And on that loop that's going to the north from our treatment plant around the lake, you'll notice that in your report, that's the same alignment that we're showing the replacement sewer force main as well, since we have an easement through that Bear Creek or Black Creek, Black Bear, yeah. There would be obviously issues environmentally about that, but for these master plans, that's our assumption.
So in summary, for this service area, the existing system was in pretty good condition. There's not a lot of immediate improvements necessary. The few that are identified, unfortunately, have the C tank pipeline and transmission main has a fairly significant cost, but I guess the majority of the system is in pretty good condition. And then going to phase 3 and beyond, similar to what we talked about for the Jenny Lind Water Master Plan, is just coming up with an annual replacement program. Just kind of an asset management approach where you should be replacing 1% of your distribution system annually, and the rest of your facilities based off their life cycle. So if you have a 25-year life cycle, you got to do 5%, 4% of those facilities should be replaced every year.
Any sense, Carl, what the breakdown is of this between the R&R rehabilitation replacement capital program and expansion-related capital program?
Well, most of these systems, the expansion-related, would be funded by developers.
Sure.
So as they,
but within the list of what I'm just thinking from the perspective, the next phase of this, of course, with all of our planning efforts, will be to go back and then have consultants, experts to calculate the appropriate connection fees associated with those expansion-related projects. So I'm sure that's, these projects are probably a mix of R&R and expansion-related. Certainly, pipeline replacement could include an expansion component if it's bigger than what you have today to add for additional capacity. But I'm just hoping that's part of and I'm sure it is part of the analysis, so that we can then use that information on the next phase.
Yes, and you'll notice on this slide, the recommended projects versus perhaps the list that if you were to study the draft, there are actually more projects on that document than are here, and I express my concern from a logistics, a practicality of how much can this district do in 5 years. So I asked if we could, for the presentation, reduce the number of projects in the 5-year scope and 10-year scope, because even these are a lot of projects identified and challenging to do for a district our size and staff availability.
So Carl, my question is, especially with the pressure issues in PRV, how does that compare with this system, compare with the Rancho Calaveras, Jenny Lind, where the guys are out almost daily fixing broken pipe because of the pressure issues? Are we gonna see that here? Is this newer or different pipe?
Well, I think in general the system's newer than the Jenny Lind system. You're gonna have similar issues eventually. I mean, the facilities here, being that they're newer, the pipe material has gotten better. I know in the Jenny Lind areas, most of those issues were with high pressure, because they had a lot of valleys in between ridges that were all in the same pressure zone. And I know as a separate project, we kind of worked with Jesse and Bill and other operation staff to add PRVs to eliminate those high pressure areas. For this, we do recommend some additional PRVs to minimize those high pressure areas. I think the goal is to keep it down below the 120 district standard, which would eliminate a lot of those concerns.
But it still could be just kind of another nightmare waiting to happen the longer we go without doing something on that system.
I don't think it's as bad as Jenny Lind, just because the grade changes seem to be more constant in these pressure areas. I don't know. In Jenny Lind, you have this area where you have a lot of valleys and ridges in that same pressure area. It didn't seem like it's as prevalent here.
No. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and hopefully like you said, the material and the construction standards were better for the installation of this pipe. That's part of our challenge, is that's was not, there's no bedding material. It's just native soil and rock around those pipes that are moving and with the pressures, and that's causing a lot of the problems, is that, against that rubbing against the pipe. Hopefully we're not, our experience says this is not the same condition that the other is. But I think the bottom line, that's why we want to do the pipeline replacement in all areas, is to make sure that we don't get to a point where we're waiting until we start to see catastrophic failures in that frequency of failure before we actually take on the replacement. Yeah.
Terry, we are not immune from pipeline failures, we're shutting down quite a large section tonight to replace a 12-inch leaky line in Copper Cove Drive.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah,
Ah.
so, can I ask a bunch of questions here?
Yeah.
Okay, Carl, we started off here by saying what a challenge that it is to have these different topographical features, but, you know, I'm a bricklayer, not a design engineer for water systems, but I would think that an ideal situation would be like you have in Copper Cove, where you have the areas like you talked about are the long, straight areas, but you have adjacent hilltops. Isn't that the sweet spot of design? So you have high hills to put tanks on and pump with a small pump up there and let it pressure, like gravity feed down? I mean, that's
Well,
not
they're
that's not a downside, that's a plus, I would
Well,
think.
but they're populated.
Hmm?
When people live on the hill, that's when you get the problems, because then you have low pressure there, you have high pressure down below.
Yeah, but proportionally, there's far more people living down, the hills go up really high, and there's half a dozen houses around them, but, you know, that was just my observation. I don't see that, unless I'm looking at it completely wrong, it's a plus, not a negative to have.
Well, I think there's two different, like in the valley where you're flat, you're taking the water, whether it's coming from a water treatment plant or a well, and you're pumping it to the equivalent elevation of your tank on a ridge. So you're still pumping it, but you're pumping it in a pressure vessel. So they use hydropneumatic tanks where they pump them up, so they pressurize the system to, say, 65 pounds, but it's pretty uniform throughout the system. Everyone's at 65 pounds. Here, you get close to the tank, you may be at 25 pounds, and then you get to the bottom of the hill and you're at 110 pounds of pressure. So so as an operator, you better know if you're at 110 pounds, if you're gonna be messing with a valve or taking a fitting off, versus in this other system where everything's 65, you treat everything similarly. Here you have to have a better knowledge of the system, I think, which makes it a little more complicated to operate.
Okay, well, it just struck me as being odd that as you talk about that the system is designed so that it's gravity fed, and that seemed like a good thing, but then you were saying that early on that it is a bad thing, so.
I don't know if I'm saying it's a bad thing, it's more complicated.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's just an example. I mean, that, you know, mechanics say that, you know, every pump they go to is different because of the demands upon that based on the pressures, and also, yeah, having the uniform would be awfully nice.
Okay, the other thing that I know that you work with the data that you're given, and a lot of it's coming from the county and whatnot, but we have, the services are 2562. That's what we have in the area. If you multiply that times 2.4 average people per dwelling or service, if you assume that there's a house where these services exist, there's already 6,000 people there that show up on the weekends. You know, I'm really skeptical about how we're going to have in 20 years here. This one figure, table 8 says that at 2040 we're going to have 5,373 population, and okay, whenever I'm certain that there are 6,000 people there on the weekends and holidays now, not 40 years from now. And this doesn't seem to address the fact that there's Tuscany Hills. We're in discussion with Tuscany Hills. Castle and Cook has millions invested in a project south of here that's Copper Valley Ranch. Would this design be different if we had factored a little bit of that reality into it, or what?
So just to I guess give you the background, so we use the county's general plan and Department of Finance's growth rates for Calaveras County. When we have a specific plan, which we had in 2005 for a lot of these areas, they had more detailed assessments of the growth rates. So in these areas that have water and sewer available, you're gonna probably have a higher growth rate. We didn't have those available, and the decision of the team was to use the published growth rates, which were also used in the water management plan. And so we took that approach. But to address your concern, whenever we identify when does the water treatment plant need to be upgraded, we refer that to the number of connections. So based on this growth rate of 0.26%, it's gonna tell us it's gonna be in 20 years. But we also say it'll be when you get to 2,950 connections. So if you get 500 additional connections, you're gonna have to start planning to expand your plant.
Okay, and you mentioned the developers would pay for that expansion, but I live in the Copper Cove subdivision, it has 2,000 lots, and as recently as several years ago, there were still 900 lots that hadn't been built upon, but I have never seen more construction activity in Copper Cove subdivision than there is going on right now. I mean, there's new houses cropping up all over the place, plus 42 houses in, right there in La Cobramina. I mean, so we're, it's a good thing that we're having this growth, but I just hope that we don't get blindsided, because there's, the development fees have already been paid on that. I mean, if the 900 houses get built in Copper Cove subdivision, there's no more expansion fees. There's nothing else except the connection fees. They're gonna pay for that, so.
So, I mean, there's two ways of using this document. We can change the growth rates based on feedback. But the easiest way is to identify how many connections that are gonna trigger these events. And so that's kind of what we've done. The growth portion is a crystal ball kind of approach.
Yeah.
We're using information that was provided from these other general plans. But it, 2 years ago, when we were doing some other ones, when there was zero growth rate,
Right.
people were even questioning
If
the low
there was
growth
gonna
rates
be
that we
a-
had.
If there's gonna be a zero.
I should say that the existing values for average day and max day, et cetera, those are based upon our records. So we had production rates averaged over a number of years, pre-drought and drought period. So those are representative of what we're experiencing now. And I asked Bill Cardinal, our chief operator there, as part of this process to get me our summer production numbers this year. And even now, we have not recovered to our historical numbers. Our flows are actually down. So it's troublesome from a planning document to say if that will continue, or will we go back to our earlier consumption per connection. And then, as you all know, Sacramento, the legislation in Sacramento has all sorts of plans for agencies like us.
Well, we've been patching the pipes, that's why your distribution's down.
If you're talking about all these weekend high population up there, it's probably more concerning is the wastewater with all the alcoholic consumption that goes through those systems than the water. That's a joke.
I know, but the larger portion of it was on septic, so that's
Oh, okay.
only the groundwater is concerned. No, I'm not challenging anything. I like what I see here, but I just think that it's kind of paradoxical that I have been waiting for 7 or 8 years now for something to happen, and now it's happening, and we're don't seem to be able to recognize it. But if it's true that your trigger point is when the connections increase, then I have no problem with that.
Well, you have to take an assumption of both. I mean, if you look back at historical growth rates in our county, it's been very, very, very low. And it doesn't matter what developers come and tell you they're gonna do, the reality is it's never happened for one reason or another. We have a couple spikes about just cyclical like the economy. And that's really how we develop. But we do develop at what is considered to be a rapid pace when that does occur. But it generally, over the course of the 30 years that I've lived here, so we've had 3 or 4 different cycles like that, where we end up getting a couple hundred homes a year, and then normally we get probably 50 or 60. you know, so I mean, we want to look at both of these things and plan for it, but I mean, it's the same in every district down in the west end. The upper end up there isn't really even affected by the cyclical economy that much, but down in Valley Springs and Copper, we have to understand we're gonna have those spikes. I worry more about making sure we have adequate staff to handle those spikes when we actually do increase in growth like we are now. You know, people in the field, they can actually oversee that work.
This is why, Director Thomas, I was so relieved that we, and I really appreciate the work engineering has done to get through these plans, because we were in a very difficult position to try to deal with that, recovery of development. If we didn't have updated plans and we're relying upon information that is that stale, I think definitely puts us in the best position. And as I mentioned before, the next phase is we're going to have an outside professional do the analysis of the related cost on the connection.
When is that going to occur?
Once we get through these plans, then we'll go out with an RFP to.
We have several of these plans already done, so we're just going to have one person do all of them, or
Yeah.
are we going to?
Yeah, we're going to hire one firm to do.
Well, how many
to do
more
them all.
plans do we have left to go?
This is it.
This is it.
the
So
last one.
I assume we would come back at the end of September, the first board meeting in October. Maybe that would be reasonable with the final first in October? First or second meeting in October?
Yeah.
You're writing it, or more specifically, Jacob.
We can update it quickly, yeah.
Once I'd asked that and I think I mentioned in the agenda item that there's a period of time I specified, I think the first week of September, that we would address the comments that we received. So we can't kind of close that until
Well,
that date.
I'm very interested in getting the master plan financial stuff squared away, because I have a hunch that it's going to reduce cost and perhaps even spur some economic activity here in the county. And it's certainly something that we need to be concerned about, trying to make sure we're not asking people to pay more than they should be paying.
The point is, we want to make sure that our, just like our planning is current, make sure our capacity fees are current related to what our planned projects are related to those systems, yeah.
Excuse me, B tank number 1 should be replaced? When are we gonna replace it?
It's the redwood tank that's
Right.
at that site, and it's quite an impressive tank. It leaks
Yeah.
very badly in the summer because as the heat expands, the redwood, it won't even hold water.
As I say, it should be replaced. Do we have that?
That's, in Director Underhill, those are the projects we're seeking the OES hazard mitigation grant funding for. We have an application in now for 4 tanks up its pass.
Right.
This one, we're just going to keep going. This is a continuous thing. We're going to work to replace all of these, but they have, to date, been able to score fairly well in grant funds.
This is the largest redwood tank I think the district has, though, remaining.
Okay, thank you, Carl. Thank you, Bob. Appreciate your time. Looking forward to that final report. Okay, we're going to make a change to our agenda. Item 4D, we're going to punt to our next meeting. But Dave, our general manager, will be making some comments about it in his general manager report later on in this meeting. We're going to move to 4D or 4E at this time. Discussion action regarding before we move on to 4E, I do want to ask, is there any public comment on item 4C, presentation of the draft Copper Cove water system? Any public comment? Okay, now we're going to move on to 4E, discussion action regarding approval of agreement with the management and confidential employees bargaining unit. Mr. Egerton.
All right, thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. I've also got Director of Human Resources, Stacy Lawler, here to answer any questions. This agenda item represents the culmination of many months of negotiations that we've had, and Stacy and I being the representatives for the district. And of course, we've had closed sessions to discuss this a number of times. but the negotiations on a contract with the management confidential unit. We have 2 bargaining units, SEIU and the MCU unit. The SEIU contract runs through June 30th, 2020. That was completed a year ago that we finished the negotiations on the existing contract. The MCU contract expired in June of this year. So until now, we have been operating without that contract, with an expired contract. So it was important that we move forward and complete this. At the same time, we obviously, as we talked about at the beginning of this meeting, we have a compensation study underway that is going to be very important for us. It covers all positions of the district, including all of these management confidential unit positions. We are spending a lot of time and effort on that, make sure that we have a quality report with information that can be relied upon to implement its recommendations, and of course that's something that will be all done with the board's involvement. We'll come back in future meetings to go over all that information. But with by bringing this contract to you today and recommending that you approve it, the goal is to get the contract in place, focus our attention on the compensation study, finish that. We should have a final report done by first quarter of next year, and once we have that, then we're in a position we can then bargain with both of the bargaining units for the implementation of the results of that contract, that compensation study. One of the things that we thought was important was that this is an unusual contract that we're bringing forward today for consideration, and that it's a 2-year contract. It would begin retroactively July 1, so we don't have any gap, and it would continue until June 30th of 2020. That's the same time period as the SEIU contract. This 2-year agreement is unusual. Typically, we have at least a 3-year agreement with the management confidential unit. But we thought that it was very important, and the board has expressed a desire that we have an end date on this that's soon enough to where we can utilize the results of the compensation study, that can still be timely and informative as we negotiate for the next contract and the implementation of the results of that. This allows for that. If we complete our compensation study by, again, first quarter of next year, then we can begin the negotiations on the existing contracts, and we can also be in position shortly thereafter, because by 2019 we'll be probably in negotiations on the next contract with the Management Confidential Unit and SEIU, and all of the information from the comp study will be fresh. So that will play a big part in our negotiations and where we land. Lastly, the terms and conditions of this agreement, it is mirrors, again, in addition to its end date, it also mirrors the compensation, the COLA, cost of living adjustment that's in the SEIU contract of 2.5% as of July 1st of this year, and then 2% at July 1 of 2019. And that is, I feel, is important to and helping us move forward again with putting this issue to rest, and to have a contract in place and not be an impasse, and be able to focus our attention on the comp study. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions. Well, lastly, I should note that there was a printing error on the document that was included, the attachment to the agreement that shows the salary schedule. It cut off the column, but it shows the positions. It showed the pay range and the salary schedules, but it didn't show the position. We have an updated, corrected copy of that. We'll make sure that's attached to it. So it's just the only difference is it identifies those positions. And again, all of those positions are subject to the compensation study.
Okay, we've been discussing this item in closed session for, like you said, several months now, so we probably don't have a whole lot of discussion here or questions or comments, but gonna entertain at this point. Anything to discuss further here at the board level?
Not for me.
This is an action item.
We're good.
Would you like a motion?
Yeah, because it's an action item, we're looking for a motion.
I move that we approve this contract.
And I second.
Okay, we got a motion and a second. Again, doesn't sound like there's any comments or further discussion here.
Well, for me, I just, again, going back to some of the promises that we made to my constituents during the open meetings, is that we would use the results of the compensation study to look at any future raises to the management staff and all. And so as I've said all along, I feel like that should be done first before any sort of increase in salaries happen.
Okay, thank you, Terry. Any further comments? Any public comment on this item? Okay, we got a motion and a second. Rebecca, will you take roll?
Director Strain?
No.
Director Davidson?
Yes.
Director Thomas?
Yes.
Director Underhill?
Yes.
Director Wright?
Yes. Okay, item passes 4-1. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stacy. Okay, item, no business on the old business, nothing to report. General Manager's report, Mr. Egerton.
Yes, Mr. President, members of the board, just to, Rebecca? Yeah, we've continued that. We'll bring it back at a future meeting. Just reiterate on the other items. Just to note, members of the board, that with regard to what the State Water Board is doing, and we will come back with an informational item on this. Fortunately, good thing is the State Board is not taking action today at its meeting to adopt the recommendation from staff on the unimpaired flow requirements. Those, right now, it's considering the tributaries to the San Joaquin River, including Stanislaus River, and what it's going to require in the way of water that must stay within the river system and not be impounded and can ultimately flow out to the delta. And again, the range it's looking at, I believe, on the phase one, and in this for these stretches is 35 to 55% with a 45% target baseline. That means, between February and June, that water would have to remain in stream. There's many different opinions, very strongly held beliefs. Some who believe that that's critically important for the future survival of the species and for water quality, other water quality objectives. Obviously, our concern is how does that impact our ability to operate reservoirs there, and certainly in the next phase, which is going to cover the rivers north of that, including the McCallum and Calaveras. That's extremely problematic for us. The State Board has and will reopen water rights to impose the requirements of whatever it accomplishes in this water quality control plan update. So it's not speculative. The consequences are real to water rights holders. And by the way, we do have many water rights on the Stanislaus River. But so we just to let you know, at this point briefly, that we are engaged in this. We have testified. We've submitted written comments on the draft document and the final supplemental environmental document for phase one, both individually and as a collective of GSAs, groundwater sustainability agencies in the San Joaquin Valley. And we're monitoring it very closely. We also have our counsel from Downey Brand are there, actually at the hearings, and have testified there as well. So we're a part of that, and we'll see what the State Board comes back with. Hopefully there's an alternative that's considered, and there's some other proposal that includes some other ideas other than strictly unimpaired flows. There continues to be ongoing effort in some areas, to do voluntary settlement agreements with the state. So this is an alternative to the regulatory framework that's phase one considers, is being considered. That's something we've been a part of discussions on the Stanislaus and the McCallum. The McCallum is still an ongoing discussion, and very well maybe a viable pathway for an agreement. That's something that we would come back to this board with if we do get to that point. But that is an alternative that we certainly, as water agencies across the state, have advocated for, to have a negotiated agreement with the state for affected water rights holders, as opposed to a regulatory requirement that's imposed through this process. That's all I'll say to that. I know it's, it's a lot of detail. We will circulate the comment letters that we have submitted again. We'll also be having a press release. We want to just let the public know that we are deeply invested in this. We are working to protect and their interest and protect our water rights. So this is a big part of the work of people like Peter right now. So we'll definitely let them know.
Excuse me,
Yeah.
every agency, or not agency, but every association that we belong to are certainly up for it, are writing letters, and, you know, I'm thinking in terms of camera, I'm thinking in terms of mountain counties.
Yeah, and they are, and Aqua is playing a leadership role in this.
Right,
Dave Bolin
right.
of Aqua was there at the state board yesterday testifying to the exact same things that we have testified to in our comment letters and all. So, yeah, we are united in this. It's one of the absolute highest priorities of the membership of Aqua, and we will be definitely a part of that. Just also, I wanted to note that we unfortunately did have a theft of one of our service vehicles at one of our plants. I don't want to go into the details of what we're doing to address the issue because that's not an appropriate discussion in public setting, but I do just want to provide, assure the board and the public that we are taking measures to further fortify our facilities and have additional security measures, and that I will keep the board advised of that in the setting that's appropriate. But certainly it's a challenge for every agency that has facilities and assets in remote areas. It's certainly not only our issue, but we are something that we absolutely want to do everything we can to try to make it as difficult as possible for this kind of thing to happen.
Alligators?
But just to note, the stolen vehicle was recovered.
It was?
Yeah, it was recovered. So the vehicle is anything to add on that, Jesse? Just that loss of equipment.
It was recovered in Campo Seco,
In good shape?
better than expected.
Okay. And is there
The
an
tools were
insurance,
gone, the tools were gone.
is there an insurance claim associated with that, Dave?
There will be,
Okay,
once we get all the information.
okay.
And of course, that's, it's great we have insurance, but we certainly don't want to affect our claim history, by having to file this kind of claim. So if we can make it as difficult as possible, we will. And there's some really sharp people out there that we're going to be working with to help us in that regard. So.
What facility? Can you share what facility it was?
Yeah,
vandalized
La
from?
Quintana wastewater plant.
The La Quintana.
Yeah.
Mm.
It's that neighborhood.
We have friends that live like 2 houses or 3 houses down from there off Blackberry. Tell them, get your motion light back in order, man.
Anything further?
No, that's all. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay, we're going to move on to board reports, information, future agenda items. Bertha,
Well,
kick us off.
regardless of the fact that I didn't receive any of your votes for District 3 Director, I'm in.
Oh.
Okay? And the only way I found out was I was reading the Union Democrat, which said, gave a big article on the election, and I'm not even on the ballot or
Typical
anything.
Democrat trying to get votes from out of the area.
The Union Democrat, not the Democrat. So I thank
Well,
you.
congratulations.
I'm in. I don't have.
That, nothing further? Thank you. Russ?
Oh, I can't top that. Anyway, I'm happy to report some new things about the 2x2 meetings. We have a new group that's meeting with Utica Water and Power
Oh,
to
right.
discuss some of the ways that we could conceivably help each other. And I guess considering some of the water wars that took place decades ago, that's a good thing. So we're talking. And we had a good meeting with the county the other day, and Brian Moss showed up with a big set of plans and shared a potential location for a septic receiving station and sludge processing area, about 50 acres up at the top on Hunt Road of their solid waste facility, which that's a good thing. another positive outcome of the interaction between the district and the county. Feels good. So anyway, that's all that I've got to report.
Thank you. Jeff?
Couple things. One, I'll just tell you, the water wars, the Utica water wars of the past, they were worth it. We're no longer a part of it. But one thing I want to talk about is the forest management. I think I'd like to see some sort of an update. I think the district has been doing a lot of work on forest management policies federally. I think our recent tour with Austin Ewell certainly gave, when I heard, what I hear from Secretary Zinke, it's basically, they're saying the same things that we are wanting. And I would like to, also maybe bring to the public's attention some of the work that we're doing with Upper Macomb Watershed Authority. I think we've done a really poor job of explaining to people that we really are concerned about this, and we are making projects. We're actually doing projects, and we're impacting federal policy, and we're going to continue to do those sort of things. So it would be nice to give a bit of an update of the projects that we've been doing in conjunction with up in Colony Watershed area. I'd like to see something in regards to our visit with Austin Ewell, and our continuing, and with Congressman McClintock, about some of these projects and policies that we're trying to make a difference on. I think that there's a thought process, particularly with all the fires, that nobody locally is doing anything, that nothing's making progress. But I think there is a lot of legislation out there that is pointing in the right direction, and I think we need to spotlight our role in that a little bit.
Absolutely. That's a great idea. Just to let you know, right now, I'm part of the work through Aqua on the Farm Bill, on the forest management provisions right there, because it's in conference committee, and we have a real chance to do some things that'll help us locally.
Great. And that was another thing that we had an opportunity to sit, with Congressman McClintock and go over some of the points that we liked and didn't like about the Farm Bill. And that's, I think, we need to explain that to people, that we are moving forward on that. And then another thing I heard, I just happened to meet with a guy about a building over in Buena Vista, and we got to talk. The building site would be at the old biomass plant. Is that what they're called?
Yeah, across from the
casino.
Newton Casino.
Yeah. Anyway, he was trying to tell me that that wood chips were not going to be allowed at county landfills in 2020.
It's alternative daily cover. They won't get the credit for that. Yeah.
And I'm just curious. I mean, I don't want to go into a lot of detail, but so they're going to have to come up with an alternative method of perhaps, processing them for an outside sale.
That's what's driving their desire to try to do something in the way of a composting type facility.
Okay.
Why they would want to co-locate one with our biosolids.
Okay, I didn't know if it was in conflict or if it was driving it, but I just wanted to make sure that we were aware that we weren't headed down a path that wasn't going to happen after 2020.
Gotcha. No, this is actually, the hope is that because of what they're doing on the vegetative mass stuff and everything, that they may be able to access grant funds that are in addition to what we can get in the way of possibly SRF funds for the biosolids. So
Another great California plan. Let's ban wood chips in the landfills, but close all the power generation plants.
On-site disposal to increase the termite population.
Yeah.
So that.
That's all I have. That's
Terry.
more than my share.
I've got a few different items here. I'm looking forward to having staff, Peter's not here, but discussion of the Calaveras HCP. I know we talked about that last time, so that'd be a great workshop topic to have. I appreciate your report on the state water stuff, and I think it's important. You had alluded to phase 2 briefly in the Calaveras, but understand that they're talking about potentially us requiring 55% of the unimpaired flows to stay in the Calaveras River during their phase 2. And I don't know that that's possible. It really isn't, but that's our biggest water source right now as far as where we pull from. So that isn't doable. So definitely there are certain advantages of increased flows that I support, but at the same time, as a director here, I can't support a 55% of the Calaveras, and I'd have to evaluate the Stanislaus a little bit more on that. So keep track. I was looking on a computer today. I was following and listening to some of the testimony with Modesto Irrigation District and even Stockton East had started. I wasn't able to listen to all of it, but so you can, the webcast or whatever, you can follow that. Interesting. Last week, I think it was last Tuesday, myself, Joel was there in the morning and Peter in the afternoon. We met over at Amador Water Agency's facility as part of the MAC IRWM to essentially, it was a workshop to address disadvantaged communities, recognizing them in some ways, but also the needs and issues, water and wastewater in disadvantaged communities throughout the MAC IRWM region, as well as Native American or tribal demand or needs as well. And so it was a facilitated exercise by the Sierra Institute. Is that who it was? Yeah, they put that on. They were paid by the folks to put that on and educate, and not only educate us, but educate them as well as some of the needs. And I thought that was a very good workshop. I enjoyed participating. The last thing I want to talk about, I didn't see any other board member there at the CPUD rate hearing, a public hearing that they had last week. Very, very hotly contested. It was an environment that was very hostile. I think they're looking at a 60 to 65% increase in rates. There were a number of speakers that asked for the immediate resignation of all board members, as well as the general manager. Although I think one of them had said that all directors that had not been in office more than a year should resign immediately. Or no, those that had been in office over a year should resign immediately.
And be replaced by who?
Well, those are the people in the neighborhoods that we interact with a lot. So, I mean, I stood back and I was very grateful of how our staff handled our rate hearings and how we avoided those kinds of issues. But with every person that made a statement about everything from their public image to their website challenges to, granted, CPUD is a very small district, very limited funds, but there was a whole audience that would support their antagonistic or negative statements towards that group. And so, yeah, it was an interesting, and in some ways I wish that we would have been there to see that, because that's how bad things can get.
Well, I understand, from listening to you, that's how I understand it was up in West Point during our rate hearings, because you allude to that about contentious.
There were fewer people in our rate hearings, at least if I was to compare the two. And certainly they weren't as antagonistic, so to speak, or as they didn't the remarks did not take into consideration the human beings that were behind the microphones and on the board. They just wanted to say what they wanted to say and get it off their their chest.
You're gonna report the outcome of the meeting?
Did I report it?
No, are you gonna include that in your summary?
No, I won't.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Just make a response to your thing about UPUD. We heard them at camera. Donna made reported CPUD, whatever. Well, yeah, no, but the group we were at the camera meeting. Donna filled in for you.
Correct. She's from CPUD.
Right, no,
Right,
I
okay.
know that, uh-huh. But she filled in for you, and she reported on the session that they had. The board has pulled back the rate increase.
Oh, so everything's fine?
Well, no, what they're,
So, what they'll do is go back in September the 11th at another meeting to decide what they're going to do.
and part of it too is they do have a significant reserve that's out there.
We don't have an agenda, so we should.
So anyway, yeah, but, so that was interesting, and then the results of that
Right.
felt like it really calmed everybody down, and everyone could escape with their life.
Okay, thank you, Terry. I have nothing to report at this time. Item 8, our next board meeting are Wednesday, September 12th, 1 PM here in this room, and then Wednesday, September 26th here in this room. And
Should I talk about that?
No. Who are you gonna say it to?
Who am I gonna say to?
Hold on, I'll go.
All the people who are out there and
Or go ahead, Russ, you have one more item on items.
For those of you who might be looking on CCTV, there's an important meeting of the Eastern San Joaquin Groundwater Basin. It's taking place on August 29th from 6:30 to 8:30. Unfortunately, you have to drive to Stockton to the Robert J. Cabral Agricultural Center. And it's on Earhart Avenue, it's near the airport in Stockton. Anyway, this will give you all the information that you need to know about the efforts that are being made to comply with the not CEQA, but the groundwater recharge. Yeah.
Groundwater management.
Groundwater management efforts, the mandated groundwater management efforts. So anyway,
Mr. President,
come on.
I just wanted to note that at the next meeting on the 12th, we will be asking to cancel the meeting on the September 26th. We have a scheduling conflict on a meeting that staff has to be at, and so we believe that we can get everything accomplished on the 12th, but that will be on the agenda request set.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to have a meeting on the 12th, and we might not have a meeting on the 26th. We're going into closed session right now to discuss two items. One is conference of legal counsel regarding La Quintana versus CCWD Superior Court matter. And the next item is conference of legal counsel on anticipated litigation, one potential case. We'll be back to report any action after the closed session item. Thank you.
Yeah, I was, when I didn't go to the thing, but I was like, when I read that thing, I was just like,
Well, yeah,
what a bunch of cowards. They're gonna have to go back, they don't. You don't tell me to shush.